Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Whoo, there's the sun. Welcome to Groziel Presbyterian Church. My name is Grace Morton, and I am the Associate for Christian Nurture here at GIPC. So glad that you guys are all here, and thank you to those of you joining us online. Big thank you to Stream Team for making this work. Woo, yeah. And those of you online, you might have seen some weird stuff earlier. That was me. I was playing with PowerPoint. So that's your behind the scenes look, okay? It's like a documentary. All right. So glad you all are here. For those of you in the room, please feel free at any point to grab food, coffee. Bathrooms are right down the hall here if you need to use the restroom. There's also a single stall all the way at the end towards the front of the church as well if you want to use that. And there's one in David's office if you want to go there and just snoop around. So let me see, other housekeeping things. Please let us know if it's just ungodly hot or ungodly cold. We're working with the heating system, and I'll admit it, I press a lot of buttons, and I don't always know what I'm doing. So please let me know, and I'll do my best to help y'all be comfortable. Throughout this presentation, there will be time for questions and answers, and so there will be, because we want everyone in the room and people online to be able to hear, we're going to ask that you use the mic. So when you have a question, just wait a little bit for I did not run track. I played tennis, so I just had to go like that. So I'm not fast, but I will get the mic to you eventually, and we want to make sure that our online friends get to hear that, as well as everyone in the room. Let me see. At some point during the morning, we will have a break, and then we will come back together for a little bit of a workshop. And those of you online, we will have the magnificent Amy Bolton helping you out to figure out how we can help you to participate. So we hope that you will stay on during after the break, that you'll come back for all of that. Yes, do I have? Oh, yes, thank you. And they're over here for those of you in the room, but those of you online can find things online. But those of you in the room, we have a table over here full of lots of goodies. You do have to pay for them. They're not free like the cupcakes. But there are lots of things. Please check out. There's Bruce's books. There's some fun stickers, too. And you can use Venmo. Can people pay you cash? Okay. He's got all that figured out. So if you'd like, during the break, please go over there and check that out. Those of you online, Google him, right? And you'll find his books. And I'm sure you'll see some on the slides as well. Any other housekeeping items that I'm missing? Yes, thank you to Sue for the delicious baked goods. Yes, and thank you to all of A&C for getting here early and setting things up. Well, without any further ado, I wanted to introduce Reverend Bruce Reyes-Chow. He is our Theologian-in-Residence this year. You guys heard me introduce him last night, but just to reiterate a little bit for those of you who weren't able to make it, Bruce has been in the PCUSA for pretty much his whole life. He's lifelong Presbyterian. He's been ordained for, we found out, 30 years. Which is amazing because he's only 20, so that's incredible how he did that. So did parish ministry for a while, is now writing books, speaking, as a coach consultant, which is great. And he was, how you guys might know him, all you Presbyterian geeks, he is moderator of the General Assembly in 2008. So yeah, all rise. And so that is a very big deal, but Bruce doesn't feel like it is. So, but we are so happy that he's here with us. Before I pass the mic over to you, I want to ask Pastor David if you would. This is David Montgomery. He's our interim pastor. I'm going to ask if you would open us with prayer.
Bruce, I didn't warn you that we are left of center.
I was like, what happened? Can you all see this? Can you see the screen? You all? Okay.
But I do think it's okay. The food's here. Let us pray. Once again, Lord, we greet this morning with the sun rising and the snowflakes falling. And we just love your creativity, your imagination, your love and care for us. So as we think deep and feel deeper, let us work together in seeing how we can make a difference in this world, because you have made a difference in us. You have called us to be theologians, to think, but you have given us mind, body, soul, and strength. And may this morning be one of reflection and response. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, all. Thank you for coming out this warm Michigan morning. I was joking with people because I did check the weather before I got here. I do not believe it said there was going to be snow in my car one morning, so which is fine. It was just I walked out this morning and the wind just went whack. Good morning, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm awake. It's good to be with you. I love places that are cold and sunny. That is the best. So glad to be with you here again. Again, if you weren't here last night, I'll introduce myself a little bit more. But we're going to begin this morning in the same way we began last night, and take some silence. I just feel like frenzy of these things beginning and just getting settled for a little bit. Those of you online, hopefully you can hear the chime. And we'll just take 2 minutes. So again, find something, just sit comfortably. Don't worry about, there's no reflection question, and you're not sharing back anything you think about anything. It's just for you. And I do this, just a reminder that we woke up this morning and you have breath, and to whom we belong is the one who calls us into this world. So take some time, listen to your inhale and your exhale, just for a few minutes to get ourselves centered this morning. So let's take our 2 minutes. As I shared yesterday when we did this in worship at church, I would play a little game with myself to see if I could guess when 2 minutes was up. And I would always be like, oh, there's a whole nother minute. Like I'd open my eyes and be like, oh. So it is, a practice that we don't get very often in our world. And if you are online or you're on your phones or watching the news all the time, there's just so little room for silence. It's one of the ways I think the church can be a little countercultural is to we're not pretending that things aren't going on outside of our world, but the world doesn't want us to remain still and silent, and sometimes that is what is needed. So thank you for engaging in that. So let's begin with a litany, created in the image of God. I'll read the orange, you read the white. Created in the image of God, I choose to join with others as God's gathered. We are the body gathered, beautiful, powerful, holy bodies. These bodies are of all shapes, sizes, abilities, and hues. These bodies move through the world, loving and loved, desiring and desired, healing and healed. These bodies hold tightly and tenderly the complexities of being, attractions, peaves, passions, scars, successes, traumas, triggers, heartbreak, intentions, rage, rapture, contradictions, courage, discombobulation, beautiful and complicated creatures seeking and being sought, and people loved beyond our imagination, by dirt roads and oceans vast, by coercion and by consequence, by circumstance and by choice. All right, thank you all. So that is a little bit about being gathered together. Again, remind you what we're doing today. So yesterday we did a little bit about belonging and welcome. And anytime you want to ask questions about that from last night, we can certainly continue that. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about the concepts of the book, and we'll do a little bit of, I'll share some stories from that. And then in the second part, we're going to do a faith montage creation community prayer that we'll use tomorrow during worship. And then I'm going to meet with some of the leadership tonight, and then tomorrow preaching, and I guess we're having communion, and we'll do some education before and after with folks. So hopefully we'll see you a bit. And again, you could ask me anything. We did this a little last night about anything, so I love talking about church. And you can take notes if you want. I give you a lot, so don't feel like you need to. Some people absorb more when you take notes, but I'll share all the slides I'm sharing today or yesterday and today with Grace, so that folks can get that out to you. I'm on the socials at @Reyes-Chow on all of them. I don't really do much I'm mostly on Instagram and Blue Sky. Blue Sky is really where I'm most active, so if any of you want to connect afterwards, feel free. And again, what is Blue Sky? Is anybody on Blue Sky? Of course. There you go. Okay, yes, look at you. All right, what is Blue Sky? Anybody want to give a 2-sentence?
It's a kinder Twitter.
It's a kinder Twitter. There you go. Yeah, it's a kinder, gentler Twitter. Blue Sky. So one of the reasons folks are shifting away from things that are meta-driven, which is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and some of the other ones, is this thing called algorithms. You've all heard the word. So algorithms help to determine what you see on your stream. Blue Sky is absent of the algorithms, and you determine what you want to see, who you follow, what organizations. So it's kind of a disconcerting place, because all of a sudden you have to develop who you want to interact with and what you see, which is kind of what we want. But what many of us have found over the years on certain things, when you talk about certain topics, you may or may not get visibility. And for those of us that kind of make our way through the world trying to share content, it becomes a little frustrating. So many folks are starting to move to Blue Sky as a new social network. All of these come and go. My first book I wrote, 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, was called The Definitive-ish Guide to Social Media and the Church. And that is not even in print anymore. Most of the services that I shared in that book for the church to use aren't even around anymore. So all of this shifts. I know it may feel like it's just so quickly and everything, but that's kind of the way the world works. But anyway, so I'm a Blue Sky. Anyway, so let me introduce myself a little bit more. than I did last night, because I think it's important in our day and age to set your social context. Like, you need to know the lenses through which I have written, but also talk about things and my perspective around faith and culture and life. None of us comes to any of this stuff as a blank slate, completely devoid of subjectivity and bias and things that have impacted how we see the world. That's a reality, and it's a joy, and it's a way that we expand our experience of who God is in the world. That we all bring something to the table, and that they're all informed by different things. So I think it is important for me to share some of that with you beyond just like, these are the things that I do, or these are the things that I've done, and kind of get you a little bit more insight into why. So I shared yesterday, this is Vespa, my dog. So we're in this really tender stage in our life, in our household, because Vespa is now 12, almost 13, and one of my children is in Ireland for about 6 months, and whispers to Vespa before she left, "Don't die while I'm gone." Like, we're in that stage of life in our house. My 2 children who are working, they're like, we're taking bereavement leave when this dog goes. For those of you that have pets, this is the dog that have been the formative time in our children's lives, and is the favorite. Vespa. She is neither Italian nor sleek. She's an English Bull Terrier, so generationally, how you know, right? Target dog, Spuds MacKenzie dog, or Patton's dog. So those are your generational cues for what kind of dog Vespa is. Dumb as rocks, 12 years old, dumb as rocks, sweet as could be. Bull Terriers, they call them 5-year-olds in dog suits. So that's kind of what she is. But anyway, I took this picture one time because I looked over and her paw is on the armrest. Anyway, so there's Vespa. So I'm a Gen Xer, I shared yesterday. Was in that, born in 1969, graduated from high school in 87, was part of the early technology wave. Look at this computer, this is an early PC. I was originally going to go to law school. That was my original trajectory, was law school and then probably into politics or into lobbying before that kind of became what it is now. So I grew up in Sacramento, California, in the state capitol. My mom worked for the state legislature for 25 years, so I grew up running the halls of our state capitol, and have been involved in politics and organizing for as long as I can remember. It's also the last time that I probably wore a tie on a regular basis. I was doing an internship at a law firm called Heron, Burchett, Ruckert, and Rothwell, and I still remember, like, you have things in your head that just stick forever. Like, I worked there for a year, and it was a law firm when I was 18, so, but Heron, Burchett, Ruckert, and Rothwell is what I did. I was a gopher, office assistant, and I just remember getting into what it meant to be a lawyer in that realm of law. Like, I would make copies and like, make sure you write down the time, because we're charging our client, like $80 for you that 15 minutes you just did. I'm like, how much am I getting for this? Like, I just remember like, something's amiss. Eventually I decided not to go that route. As I mentioned, I'll talk about a little bit, my grandparents from the Philippines came over, and they were farm workers, and they were part of the farm worker strikes in the Central Valley of California. And I discovered the law firm that I was working for actually back in the day represented the farm owners against my family. It was a very conflicting time for me, and eventually decided to head into ministry, which I'll talk about a little bit later. This is my Chinese side. So this, I mentioned that my half Chinese, the Chow in my name. This is, at this point, his name was Charles Fong. So I ask this wherever I go. Any Asian American studies majors in the room? All right. I went to one. Have you taken classes, or are you an Asian American? Oh, awesome. Well, look at that. I was somewhere at speaking, and I said, "Are any Asian American studies majors in the room?" And somebody popped their hand up, but I got so excited, and then I forgot that my kid was there. And I was like, Abby. Have any of you heard, here's your 5-minute Asian American Studies lesson. Have any of you heard of the term paper sons? The what? Paper sons. No? Okay. So, as you know, Chinese helped to build the railroads. And as we do, when we're done with inexpensive labor, we're like, thank you very much. You may now leave. Or we don't really need you anymore. And so that's what birthed what many of you probably did learn about was the Chinese Exclusion Act. So the Chinese Exclusion Act made it so that there was no immigration from China. So, but during the railroad times, there were people born here. And so 14th Amendment, we have birthright citizenship. So those were, they were American citizens if they were born here in the United States. Well, what happened then is those folks would go back to China and spend a decade-ish there, and then come back to the U.S., still American citizens, and they'd tell the U.S. government, while I was gone, I had 10 sons. And so here are all their names, and they are all American citizens because I'm an American citizen, right? That's how our citizenship works for now. That's how it works. And then back in China, those identities would be sold, right? So somebody would buy that, in our case, the Charles Fong name, the Fong name. My great-grandmother, my grandfather's mom, bought one of those identities from the Fong family. He then comes over with a book and learns all about his new family. So it'll be questions, you can look this online, the questions that are asked at Angel Island. It'll ask you, like, which direction did your house face in your village? How many sets of dinnerware does your mother have? Like, all these kinds of questions to make sure that you are really part of the Fong family. Well, eventually folks learned how to be creative with the system, and they were called paper sons because the imagery was they're at Angel Island, which is the Ellis Islands of the West Coast, and ripping off the paper as they learn about their new family and throwing them out the window. I don't know if that actually happened, but that's the imagery. And so they were called paper sons when they got in. So my grandfather was a Fong for the first, 12 years of my father's life. Fought for the U.S. government. This is him stationed in Okinawa. My grandfather was one who came over and was super American. I mean, if you know immigrants in your world or in your life, if they were the first Chinese family, non-white family, to own property on the north side of Stockton, California. And you could always know the Chow house because you would drive down and the number of American flags that were out front dwarfed anyone else. And if you know immigrant life, right, you are constantly trying to prove to others that you are truly American. And so that was my grandfather. He signed up when he could and was stationed in Okinawa. He used to tell stories all the time about his captain would tell him, Chuck, you got to stand right next to me so our people don't shoot you thinking that you're Japanese. And my grandfather would just laugh and tell these stories as if these were these like, isn't that funny? And we're all like, no, that is not funny at all. And he just talk about, if any of you have military or you've been in combat, he just talks about these stories now. I think is a way to cope and deal, but also just kind of sharing the things that he went through. So he was a Fong all this time. He got a medal that we have in the family, and it says Charles Fong on it. And then the U.S. government offered amnesty to paper sons. And they said to them, so this would have been in the 50s, if you would like to reclaim your real name, all you have to do is come in and tell us, and we'll give you back your name. Now, I'm pretty sure today, if that were offered, there are a lot of people that would not trust. Just come in and tell us how you got here, and it'll be fine. I don't think that's the climate right now. But my grandfather was like, okay. And so my grandfather went in, and so in many ways, my dad was a Fong one day, and then became a Chow the next day. And so there are paper sons in the Chinese American community, especially if they came from southern China, Cantonese speaking, early immigrants, that are paper sons and they don't even know. And it's something that a lot of families have kept as a deep, deep secret. My grandfather chose to change his name, and so we have our official, like our real name, and our family's gone back and visited our villages on my both grandparents' side. So that's my grandfather. I come from a deep connection to the U.S. In his immigration story, and also just in I've always thought about what would he think about us right now? Like what would that generation think about what's going on now? And I don't know. I actually don't know. He's a very quiet, strong, silent type, and so my fondest memories of my grandfather were just sitting in silence, eating breakfast, and he would have his bird sitting on his shoulder. Corey the lovebird would just sit with his and hang out. But that's my grandfather on one side. So my other grandfather on the right there, Esteban de los Reyes, which is, I think, the coolest name ever if we had to vote. So Esteban de los Reyes came to the U.S. He lied and said he was 18. He came over when he was 16. When he got here, they immediately changed his name to Steve Reyes. So that's what he always was known as, but we always called him Esteban de los Reyes. He first came through Hawaii and was a farm worker in the sugarcane fields, and then came to the Central Valley and was a farm worker working in the Central Valley, and then was part of the labor strikes. Most of you know the United Farm Workers Union, the UFW. Anybody know what the United means? Like who was United? No, we just know United, right? And we know Cesar Chavez, and we know Dolores Huerta, but the United...
Farm aid.
Far before Farm Aid, so this is in the Central Valley with the grape tomatoes. So the United Farm Workers was actually the united between the Filipino farm workers and the Mexican farm workers, and that's where the United comes from. So you've seen the movies and you've seen all the pictures, but sitting at the table to sign that was Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, and a man named Larry Itliong, which is the leader of the Filipino farm worker movement. That's just a story that you don't get anywhere. He was perfectly equal with everyone else, but that was what my home church was birthed out of, the farm worker strikes in the Central Valley. So that's my grandfather sitting in the pews at Trinity Presbyterian Church in Stockton, California. That church was built without the name Filipino in it. It was a church that was on the south side of Stockton. That's the side of Stockton that if you ever drive through Stockton, California, and people are telling you, they would say, do not get off at 8th Street. That's because you're either visiting my family or buying drugs, and sometimes both. But that's where I grew up. That's my life. That's where my home church was in the middle of this neighborhood that everybody else thought was terrible and rough, and I loved it. It was a community that cared for me and took care of me and my family. It was when they started the church, though, they knew that while it was historically Filipino, it wasn't going to remain that, because when people immigrate to the U.S., they don't immediately move to the north side, right? They start on the south side. And so my home church is small and struggling, but it's weirdly diverse. Like, it is such a strange thing when you go in and there's like 30 people, but you might have 8 different countries of origin represented in those 30 people because of immigration trends. And you can almost see by the ages about when immigration was happening in the U.S. So they were also Filipinos who weren't Catholic. So if you know anything about the Philippines, especially back then, it used to be in the 90+% Catholic, and now it's less now, but it's still probably in the high 80s. So if you chose not to be Catholic during that time, that was actually a pretty big statement. And in the Philippines, the Catholic Church has all the power, the wealth, the land, government, especially in those days. And the Protestants were the ones who worked with the poor. They worked with the farmers. They worked around justice issues. They did everything that got them branded as communists in that time. And so that is our PCUSA, Presbyterian, our history. Our connection to the Philippines is through the Protestant church and working with the poor and the farmers and those without power in the Philippines. And that's why there, we started schools and hospitals and churches. That was the three things that we started in a lot of countries, but particularly in the Philippines. And so a lot of my people who raised me come out of this deep connection to the people and the church's deep commitment. So I grew up in a church that was always in the community, a lot of educators and folks who believed that the church's role in the world was to change the world. That yes, we enjoyed each other, and there was, I mean, if you want really good food, you go to an ethnic church often because, I mean, we had lunch every Sunday and stayed at church until 3 o'clock every Sunday, and it was a feast. And so we enjoyed things, but that was always to feed us so that we could be out in the community and working for justice in the world. I come out of what we now know is kind of a progressive church. It's hard language these days, how we label stuff, but I grew up in a church that was multi-ethnic. I grew up in a church that back in those days, 70s and 80s, I only had female pastors growing up. I've never had a male pastor in my entire church life. And we always had same-gender couples in our community. How that works in the Philippines is very different than in the United States around gender and same-sex couple. And so I just saw that as a norm in my tradition until I left there. And then you go somewhere else within the PCUSA, Presbyterians or not, and all of a sudden I'm told, oh, you go to that progressive church. And I was like, I just go to church. I mean, I don't know if you want to call it whatever you're going to call it. But that's kind of what I grew up with. This is the norm for me and my family, my siblings, and how it's the formative place for me, and very involved denominationally, connected to other churches, all that. So Trinity Presbyterian Church in Stockton. That's my mom. I talked about her before. She is also a pastor. This is my graduation from seminary. I went to San Francisco Theological Seminary, graduated in 95, so that May. And then my mom started seminary that next fall. So she told me, she's like, I do not want to go to school with you. And I was like, because I'm smarter? And she's like, no, because you're kind of a jerk. And I'm like, okay, Mom, that's fair. Fair enough. But so I joke that I'm a pastor's kid with all the glory and none of the baggage. So, because I did not have to grow up as a pastor's kid, which again, as we talked last night, can be tough sometimes. But my mom pastored for 19 years and is now failing retirement miserably. Not surprised at all, knowing if none of you know do you know my mom, Dave? Have you met my mom? Okay. So my mom is one of those people, and I'm going to share this, and then don't look at people in the room. So my mom is one of these, I will say, one of these women who has always spoken her mind. And I was a single mom. She was a single mom, raised me, and made it and survived through the world. My dad paid like $50 a month child support in the 70s. I mean, it was ridiculous what she had to do. Married to another gentleman for a while who was terrible, and eventually had the courage to leave him, and is now married to my stepdad for the last 30-something years. My mom is now in that stage. She's 75, and still our family's involved with this cult called Orange Theory. And it's an exercise thing, and she goes 5 days a week, 75 years old, works out 5 days a week. She told me about a couple of years ago, she says, I'm now at the age where I can say whatever I want, and I don't care. And I'm like, Mom, that is not age. And I tease her, I'm like, Mom, there were moments, she was in the same presbytery as me when she was ordained, she came into the same presbytery, and I sat in meetings with this lady, and I was like, I am glad that she loves me, because I would not want to cross my mother in a meeting, because I watched her eviscerate people. And there were times I'm like, Mom, that was mean. And she's like, it's the truth. And I was like, okay. So that's my mom. And she is still active. She's on Synod, for those of you that are connected. I don't know. This lady is failing retirement miserably. But that's my mom. She's called Lola, which means grandma in Tagalog, in Filipino. And she is the matriarch of the family. My siblings just voted that I'm taking care of mom when she needs it. So I was not at the table when that vote was taken, but she's like, you don't have any kids at home anymore. You get mom. I'm like, great, thanks. Okay. We'll still be a few years. All right. And so I now make my way. I have pastored for about, I'd say I've been in churches 25 of my 30 years of ordained ministry, but I now get to write. And I would have never thought, I was a terrible student in high school. Kind of got it together my junior and senior year when in those days you could still salvage and get into college. Like the pressure that our young people are under right now around college it's a travesty to what we're doing to our young people and our parents in trying to navigate the college system. But back then, you could slough off your freshman and your sophomore year and then do better your junior and senior year and still get into school. So I was going to go to UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine. They have the most intimidating mascot ever. Does anybody know the UC Irvine mascot? They're the anteaters. I mean, we have other ones. UC Santa Cruz are the banana slugs. So maybe, I don't know which one I'd be more scared of. But I ended up not going, but was get to do that now. I would have never thought that I would have written books, so I am not one of those that thinks I have a ton more in me, and that's just what I do. That's what I'm doing now. So I wrote that book. The last book I wrote was called In Defense of Kindness, was a secular book. And so was speaking in very different places around the power of kindness as a transformative lens through which we see the world. So I look at kindness, it's not being nice, it's not about not disturbing the waters, it's about understanding everybody having human dignity. And so I look at kindness as civil disobedience, protest, also dropping your kids off at drop-off during the day, all of the ways in which kindness. There are only 5 more copies. I almost sold out at the last thing I was at. I love this book. I love, it's like your children, you love them all. But some days you like some more than the others. This book I'm really, really proud of. This book was written after I watched the Mr. Rogers documentary. Did any of you ever watch that? Yes. Yeah. So I had started working on this book and took a pause in it around 2016. I don't know if you know what was happening around that time. There was an election that happened, and I didn't know, that was not where I wanted us to be. And I was not feeling particularly kind in my outlook on the world. So I told the publisher, I'm like, I got to pause. I can't write this book right now, because I don't mean it. And then I watched this documentary from about Mr. Rogers, and those of you that have seen it and were informed by Mr. Rogers, you were probably in tears the whole time. My kids watched it, and they're like, "Oh, that's a good documentary." And my wife and I are like, "What do you mean that's just a good documentary? Like, Mr. Rogers was, formed us." My wife used to get dressed up to watch Mr. Rogers as if he could see her. I mean, it was this whole thing, and Mr. Rogers, after that movie, I turned to my wife, and I was in the movie theater. I'm like, I think I need to get back to this book. And then the next day, the publisher emailed me and said, "Hey, are you ready to get back to this book?" And I'm not a person that's like, I need a sign. Like, I'm not, that's not me at all. But I'm like, this feels pretty clear. And so I wrote this and got to talk about this one for a couple of years. Yes?
Can I give you a really random, and it's just for you?
Sure.
In this church.
Sorry, I was slacking.
This is just for you. Some of the people here will already know. But in this church, there was a woman called Nancy Hazlett.
Nancy Hazlett?
Nancy Hazlett. Does anybody remember Nancy? Yeah? Anyway, she was a member of this church for a very long time, and she was my piano teacher. And Mr. Rogers actually asked her to marry her.
Oh, that was not in the documentary.
I know. And she said, no.
We will keep that between us.
That's true, but this will nail this church in your memory. This was
That's
the
right.
Mr.
That's the place
Rogers
where I
church.
discovered a secret about Mr. Rogers.
That's it.
And if you're Presbyterian, I love, I'm super ecumenical, obviously, but whenever Mr. Rogers pops up, every Presbyterian knows, like, we're like trying to fight not to say, you know, he was Presbyterian. I mean, because we have so few, like, people that we like, you know, Presbyterian. Like, Mr. Rogers is our person. And all my friends are like, yes, we know he was Presbyterian. And to this point, the only person in our denomination we've ever ordained to TV ministry, which is fascinating. We came very close to having Joanne, his wife, the one he married, write the foreword to this book, which would have been, but she at that point was out, her health was not able to do that. But anyway, so that's what I get to write, and I get to talk and all that kind of thing. My favorite thing about traveling is watching my suitcases come off of the conveyor belt. So I have these 2 suitcases, that one's over there too, where I have all of these stickers on there. And so they're like from where I've traveled, but people are always looking at this one going, well, that's interesting. And then I have another one on the other side that says, "Dear God, please protect me from your followers." And you can always watch people like this, and they're turning their heads, and then there's all kinds of other stuff that I have on there too, which is fun. So I get to travel and talk about church. We are struggling as a church, but I believe in who we are as Presbyterians. I don't think we're the savior to the church by any means, but I do think that if we don't continually talk about who we are and who we want to be, then we doom ourselves to a decline that is not of our own choice. I don't think our reality or our purpose in life as a church is actually just to survive. That is, if somebody says to me, I come to a church like, well, what's the mission of the church? Is to be here. That's not very compelling to me, right? But yet that's what drives much of what we do is we see ourselves shrinking, dying, whatever, however you want to describe it, and we see that as the first thing we need to fight. If you know your book of order, at the very beginning of our book of order, it actually tells us that we should be the church even at the risk of our own death. And that I don't think we take that very seriously. I think we often just want to be the church so we stay alive. And I get that. I mean, again, my home church, it would pain me to see my home church close. But I could see that if they don't shift a little bit, that could happen. I would hope we would do it with dignity and intentionality. But their main purpose can't be just to be there. Because that's not how they started, that's not how they grew, and I don't think that's what God calls us to. So I work with a lot of people, pastors, and sessions to help think about what it means to take seriously this call to be the church in the world. And so when we talk about coach sultan, so some people have coaches, and the pure coaching is, I just ask questions, and the answers are all within you. And that's fine sometimes, but I also am like, yeah, but there's also things you could try. So I help churches and individuals kind of think through, not just you have the answers, which you do, but also here are some proddings and some things that you may want to think about. So I love doing that work with folks. And then I do a little part-time work with a conference center called Zephyr Point Conference Center in Lake Tahoe. It's a Presbyterian conference center, and it's the conference center that I grew up going to. It's the place that raised and formed me. It's a terrible place to have to go once a month. This is the view from my cabin. It's terrible that I have to do this. So I go up there once a month and help do their church relations and communications and things. So it's very part-time, but I love things. I think camps and conferences are a vital part of spiritual growth and our young people's lives, certainly, but also for those of us that are kind of always on the go, that having camps and conference centers to kind of retreat a little bit are really important. So that's the other work I do.
Well, we all have our crosses to bear.
We do. We do have our cross to bear. This is the snow time. So I was a church planter for most of my career. So early on, the first church I pastored, the one I shared last night that we had all the trauma, it was actually a church that was down to about 12 people, and they invited me, as we do, we say, hey, if we get a young pastor, family, I didn't have a family at that point, but we were, only married 3 or 4 years, then the church will grow. And if they're a good preacher, even better, because that's how you grow a church. I know that there's something in our DNA that says that we want that to all be true. It is not true. And if we put too much pressure, as you all are looking for your pastor, if you believe that calling the young pastor with a family is the primary motivator for growth, that is, again, understandable, but puts a huge amount of pressure that is unfair to your pastor. Also, you can't be a terrible preacher, I will say, to have a church grow, but you don't have to. Preaching on its own is something that helps to kind of keep the community connected to one another, but other parts of the pastorate are at least, if not more important, to pastoral leadership these days. You are not a church that is of the old days and some of our big, huge churches where you can just pay somebody to be an excellent preacher. I don't think you are. Maybe you are, but there are very few churches like that. I would love one of those gigs where all you're paid to do, and paid well, is to preach on Sunday morning. But that is not the reality of most of our pastoral positions, even in churches that have resources. So that's what I did most of my time, was be in church growth settings. I'll say before I jump to the slide, the first church I was at, 12 people in worship, maybe 20 people in worship. We grew to 150 in 3 years in San Francisco. And you would think that that would be a really successful story, except it was a church that said, we want to grow, and we think you can help us do that. We helped them do that, and then folks realized, oh, wait a minute, not that way. So growth is always something we yearn for as congregations, and many people regret when it happens. Because what it means is that we have to change. And this is not like what we've been doing in the past is bad or wrong, but it is a matter of how do we welcome in folks who see the world differently, who experience differently, experiencing just differently. And so that congregation eventually decided for me that we were no longer the right fit. And so it all came to a head at a session meeting where one of the elders said to the session, like, we could no longer have Bruce and John Lee. Do you know John Lee? Remember? John Lee was my youth director at the time. We could no longer trust Bruce and John with the copier codes, because we had made extra copies for something, and that was the thing that put this particular elder over the edge. And I remember an elder, so this is back in the late 90s, right? Language is different now, but I just remember this elder in the middle of a session meeting saying, this is bull, and just swore in the middle of the session meeting and walked out. And at that point, I knew I was done. And it was one of those times where the church got what it wished for, but didn't really know what the impact of that was going to be. I think every church has to think very carefully about its wanting to grow and what that means for people, and to have those conversations before you begin this process of saying, yes, we want to grow. Because I think it's fine for some churches to say, we actually don't want to grow. It's better to know that and say, we're going to focus on who we are now, rather than to just say, yeah, we want to grow, and not know the ramifications of it. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, so I got to do that. I love talking about church growth. We could talk about it all day. But I'm also come out of deep activism in our church. And so I believe that there are some times when we are called to proclaim to the world what we believe is the truth that God wants us to see in the world, and risk what that may mean to our own comfort and station. And it's different for everyone. I find great community in the activism work that I do. It is no surprise my children are all activist type people. And so that's been always part of my ministry and life. And then I love to convene people together and bring folks together around a lot of things that are important to me. This is a group I took to Palestine in May. I've been twice since the 24. I've traveled to Palestine with Sabil, which is an ecumenical Christian liberation organization, so working with Palestinian Christians who are often never heard about and from what's going on there. I'm spending a month there in April, so I'll be taking 2 groups again to Palestine, organizational folks, and then a bunch of first-time visitors. We're going to be in the Old City in Jerusalem over Holy Week. Eastern and Western Easter line up this year, and so it's going to be kind of a powerful, powerful experience. We meet with activists and Palestinian folks there while we're there, but this particular Easter is going to be kind of amazing. So we'll come down the Mount of Olives on Palm Sunday and with thousands of people and sing with nuns underneath Jerusalem who we can't understand each other in any language but song. And so it's a pretty powerful experience if any of you ever had a chance to go. But that is something that I'm deeply connected to. It's my wife, Robin. This is, we're 21 and 24 at this point. 30, let's see, should be easy, 1990. 35 years this year in December. We have been married. I know, it's wild. This is us now. We look quite different. We were babies when we were married. 3 kids, those are my kids I've talked about. So Annie is on the right-hand side. Annie is just graduated from college and is now in Ireland, hanging out. If any of you have soon-to-be college or college graduates, they do this visa. You can go to Ireland or Australia and just work. You can have any job you want, and you can spend up to a year there. It's kind of cool. So she's just hanging out there. She starts a PhD program at University of Oregon in the fall, and she's studying American youth sports and the upholding of empire, which she's looking at how American youth sports now are not about sports, that it's about status and money and access and all that. And then Abby, our middle one, is also, we have 2 doctors in the family, not the kind that generally people have, but Abby starts a PhD program next fall as well at the University of Minnesota, studying labor and farm worker movements in the United States. And then Ev on the left over there is our eldest, 28, and Ev is director of operations at a church in San Francisco. So those are the kids. If you notice their sweaters, so Abby graduated from college 2 years ago and said, I'm just going to not do anything, and I don't want to think, I don't want to get a job, I'm going to hang out for 3 months. So she knitted us all Harry Potter sweaters. So this was one, our photo shoot was all with our Harry Potter sweaters on. Things that bring me joy, I'm a big soccer person. Our 2 youngest played very serious soccer, one played in college, so I was on the sidelines just really missed that. I was the chaplain on the sidelines, which meant that I was the one that was told to go talk to so-and-so's parent so they didn't get kicked out. That was my job. I didn't apply for that job at all, but that was me. But we're big now into soccer. We have we're particularly into women's soccer, so we have a women's soccer team now. BFC, my pandemic hangover thing, we're houseplants. So it takes me a legit 2 hours to water my houseplants every week, every other week. And I talk to them. My wife refuses to talk to my plants when I'm gone. So I come home and I'm like, my plants are so sad. Did you talk to them? And she's like, no. It's like, does it count if I talk to them or they're in the room while I'm talking? And I'm like, no, that doesn't count. You have to say good morning to them because They need that. Anyway, so that's one of them. I'm the primary cook in our family. I've always been. My grandfathers were the primary cooks in our families growing up, so that's kind of what I knew. But I still cook. My wife will come in, and she'll say something like, "Can I ask you a question?" And if those of you that have people in your life like that, you're like, I don't really want to know what the question is, because it's not going to be good. And so she says, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Go ahead. How many people live in this house now?" And I'd be like, 10. And she says, "That's a lie. There are 2 of us here, but I still cook as if a soccer team's coming over." So that is a red flag. And then I shared this last night, the ass in front of the stained glass window. I love talking about church. I think that we as a church, especially mainline, we have something to share in the world, and we're terrible at sharing it. And so we can decide that that's just the way it is, and our version of the gospel will die with us, or those of us that are still in it and committed to it are going to find a way to share it with more conviction and passion and impact. And that's very simple for me. It formed me. I believe it is one way that the gospel needs to be spoken in the world. And so we'll talk about that today, about what that means for me. But I love talking about church. Oh, look at another picture of my dog. There you go. So let me ask you who's in the room. Who are you? All right, so, oh, boo. This is from my last weekend. I'm so good at this usually. But let's pretend that doesn't say First Presbyterian Church, Salem. Well, welcome, Ohio, whatever the joke is for a rock star. All right, I'm going to ask you for this church. First timers, are any of you this is the first thing you've come to? That rarely happens, this is not the first thing you would come to. Okay, raise your hand if you are 1 year or less part of this church.
Well, we have several churches represented.
Oh, you do? Well, your church, any church. All right, 1 year? 1 year or more. You've been at your congregation 1 year or more. Okay, so keep your hands up, right? This is where the thing happens. 1 year or more. Okay, so 5 years or more. So put your hands down if it's been less than that. 5 years or more. Okay, looking around. We'll see who's left standing at the end. 10 years or more. Really? 20. All right, 30. Still right. Look at that. All right, that was it. So 40. Holy moly.
You're not even 40 years old.
I was born on Sunday morning, actually, and
Please say you were born here. Oh, that'd be the best. Okay, 50? You have 50 years here? Really, 50? 50. I feel like we're now in a competition. 55. We're like in a, do I hear 50? Do I hear 60? You hear 60 years? There you go, you win. 60 years. That's a long time. That's amazing. That's wonderful.
Our church is only 69 years old.
I know. That's right. I had learned you were 67. Was that? 57 was when you all were started, which is fairly young, right? That's a fairly young church in our denomination these days. Great. Okay, so, childhood faith denomination. Just want to see who's in the room. How many of you grew up non-denominational? Really? Huh. I don't think I've ever been where nobody, okay. How about Catholic? Not that many, just a couple of you? Okay, 3, okay. What about other faith traditions? So other faith traditions. Okay. All right, so let's see. What about Presbyterians? You grew up Presbyterian? Oh, interesting, okay. And what about none? You didn't have any church background growing up? I'm not on the West Coast right now. There you go, all right, 1. I mean, so when you're in West Coast churches, it's 25% of the people had no church background at all. It's if you come from other parts of the country and you come to the West Coast and see people like that, actually none, it's a very different experience for folks. All right, so I'm going to ask you, look, I changed that one. Whew. Whenever I go and travel, I don't get a lot of time to hang out in places, but I love traveling and seeing things. So what is the quintessential or your favorite season here? Fall? Summer? Nobody's saying right now. Spring? Construction season? Yeah, I hear your bridges are going to have some construction. That's going to be fun for you all. What's the activities that happen here that are like, if you had to do something, what's the things that are the sailing? Golf? Hockey? Oh. Is there a rink here on the island? No, but that's right. I guess I'm in hockey world now, in hockey land. Theologian-in-Residence. Yeah. As I shared last night, I told my kids, I'm going to be a theologian-in-residence, and they're like, whatever. All right, so what's the quintessential or your favorite food that represents here? Meatloaf. There you go. Okay. I love a good meatloaf. I mean, my kids, like my wife has the opposite because they had meatloaf out of necessity growing up. Like it was the thing that her mom could afford. Like it was that kind of meal. And so she just has this like, oh, I love meatloaf because, I mean, so my kids, like, anyway. So, all right, so what else? Deviled eggs. What? That's here? Coney dogs are here? Oh, okay. Whitefish. So this is where you know I'm coming from. You can eat the fish out of the water you catch? Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, we don't really do that where I am. You got to go way up into the mountains so you know the water's clean to eat the fish. Yep. We have a really big Middle Eastern population nearby, so we have the best. Yes. Middle Eastern food. Yeah. Yeah. I did drive into Dearborn yesterday and got some great coffee and food and all that, which was really, really fun. I was in Nebraska, and any from Nebraska? So theirs was almost unison, chili and cinnamon rolls. Because they grew up, that was the school lunches, and it's become this like cultural, like very Nebraska, like, and so they become fancy. So you could go to a restaurant and it'd be like fancy chili and cinnamon rolls on the same plate. I think it was really interesting. I love learning about that stuff. So what's the hidden gem here on the island? Like a visitor comes, like, here, I'm going to take you to see this. Gross Eel Presbyterian Church was the answer over here. Yeah. Anything else? Like, what's the thing?
One of the things is the Episcopal Church has their first structure was gifted by a person who started their life off as a slave, got their freedom, and then gave a lot of money to build this church structure, but it has stained glass windows, and it really is quite a special.
So the history of the Episcopal Church. Wow. Tiffany glass window, right? Yeah.
It's actually quite nice.
Huh. Awesome.
Like in a European way.
Cool. Yes, sir.
We have interfaith activities.
Okay.
The churches are very close.
Yeah. Great. Other things. What's the thing you take somebody to see? Yeah.
Number of deer we have on the island.
Really? Really? Is it a problem?
The neighborhood dogs.
They're neighborhood dogs. How did they just cross the bridge and like, or they were here before you probably? They swim? Interesting. Yes, sir. Go for it.
The bicycle museum over on Macomb Street is fabulous.
The bicycle museum. See, these are things that unfortunately I might not have time to see, but that's good. One more. Black squirrels. I think we have black squirrels. I hate squirrels. They are cute and all that, but I'm like Elmer Fudd in our backyard where they are. Yes, okay, last one.
For those of us who don't live on the island,
Yes.
we go to Detroit. I mean, like, we have fun in Detroit.
For those that don't live on the island, go to Detroit. There you go. All right. Thank you all. I'm going to go and keep going. All right, so here's where we're starting. Deconstruction. We're going to start with something really pleasant, and the imagery is great. So have any of you heard this term when in relationship to the church? Anybody? Yes, yes, yes. What, really quickly, what do you understand that to be? Postmodernism. Breaking out of toxic Christianity. Tell me what you think, what is your definition of postmodernism for, I think that's one of those words that a lot of us have different.
So we're taking everything apart, right? So we're deconstructing everything down to, I mean, every element of looking at it and going, okay, that no longer works. And so deconstruction has been what we've been doing at least maybe for around here, we've been thinking about that for the last 20 years.
Yeah, yeah, and it goes in phases.
It goes in phases, and then we reconstruct, and then we deconstruct it again.
Okay. So toxic, coming away from toxic faith tradition. Other deconstruction in relationship to church faith that folks want to share about what they understand it to be?
Well, Trip Fuller was our last.
Oh, you had Tripp here? Yes, which Tripp and I have run in similar circles for a long time. Did he do his podcast here? Has changed. Deconstruction has changed. Any others?
Questioning, just starting to ask why.
When was Tripp here?
Last year.
Oh, last year.
2024,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so he probably did he talk about deconstruction quite a bit? Okay, so then you all are pros at deconstruction. Right, so questioning, re-examining religious belief. These days, it's mostly in culture seen as, when you hear about it, we're talking about folks kind of moving away from evangelical, kind of conservative fundamentalist Christianity. You know, I think part of the issue to these days, and why I do so much about sharing about my background, is that it saves time when we label each other. And sometimes that actually is helpful to me or to ourselves to kind of understand a general culture of a place. But part of our calling now is to not necessarily even take time to get to know each other, but to acknowledge that even our deepest enemies are more complex than we want them to be. So when I talk about conservative evangelical fundamentalism, those are very layered, but you kind of get, it's generally people who have grown up in a kind of faith that is not us and are examining almost every element of what that means. And so we've seen this in a variety of ways. Some of you may have been around when the emergent church conversation was happening. It's probably the most recent. That would have been led by folks like Brian McLaren, Tony Jones, Doug Padgett, Nadia Boltz-Weber was, if you've ever read Nadia's stuff. Those are all my contemporaries. I was very involved with that. I was the safe mainline person. When I was elected moderator in 2008, that was kind of at the height, beginning of the height of the emergent church movement. There was an article written about me. So from Presbyterians and mainliners, the articles that were written about me they started always with, Bruce Reyes-Chow is a blogger and doesn't wear a tie. That was the way I was described on almost every Presbyterian article that you would read about me being elected moderator. The emergent church movement was, Bruce was elected moderator of a denomination that's dying. Are they just giving him the keys, basically, to a dying institution? Which is very different, kind of looking at anxiety and fear and crisis and scarcity from different ways, right? I've never felt that, but I love talking with these folks because we can learn a lot from post-evangelical life as well as just, I think, evangelical life. So that the emergent church is what you've heard of. Post-evangelicalism is what you'll hear a lot now. Those are kind of post-evangelicals, ex-evangelicals, ex-evangelicals is what some folks will kind of be. And then there was all-encompassing this as this postmodern church idea. A critique of postmodern church would say, postmodern church have no boundaries, they're open to anything. Those of us who were engaged in conversation about postmodernity was like, that's not true. We are just examining everything. I mean, there's a very big difference between what you're open to and what you land on. And so you'll hear that. Now, some markers of deconstruction, that faith is more about asking questions than claiming certainty. In our tradition, generally speaking, we encourage questions. I mean, not everybody does that, but generally speaking, I would think in our Presbyterian and mainline traditions, questions are okay. I mean, generally speaking. Obviously, there's always exceptions. But in some traditions, that is not okay. Questions are a sign of weakness. And folks are examining whether that's true. There's been various trends in engaging in social justice and around gospel work. Some of your earlier folks were folks like Tony Campolo, who really engaged in a lot of social justice work out of Eastern Seminary. Tony, recently died, was kind of an amazing person. As is the case, more amazing is his spouse, Peggy, who is just an amazing person. Tony was a friend and mentor of mine, and he helped me to see, like, I don't have any evangelical roots at all. Like, I grew up in this church in Stockton. I never engaged in any campus ministries of an evangelical sort, conservative sort, in college. And so Tony and those folks helped me to see what that experience was like in a positive way, and just opened my eyes to many, many things. Jim Wallace is a more recent person. The missing thing from those kind of that stage, all issues except for LGBTQA. So Tony was not LGBTQA affirming until later in his time. Jim Wallace had not really talked about it much, but was pushing their tradition to be a little more open around justice issues. So now, yep.
One thing about Tony is you didn't sit in the front row when he was speaking.
Oh, I've been in.
You had to spit.
I have been, yeah. If you don't know Tony Campolo, so he was a evangelical preacher, and he would often he was known for one particular thing that he would do. He would stand up and say, there are this many thousand effing things happening in the world, and he'd say, like, children starving. And then he'd say something like, and you're just mad that I said that word. That's what you're mad about. And not that, this many people are starving in your city or whatever. And so Tony he knew his audience, he knew good, but yes, he was a spitter when he preached. So I miss that guy. He was wonderful. I mean, I probably think I'm a better friend than he thought of me, but he was always like, I would sit down with him one-on-one once a year at a conference, and he would tell me how to do what I do better, which was always an amazing time with him. Anyway, enough about Tony.
He wouldn't say effing. He would use the full.
Yes, he would use, I am just not quite comfortable in churches to say that, because I get in trouble enough. So, yeah, he was from Philly. All right, I'm going to keep going. Thank God for Tony. But a lot of folks coming out of that's not something that happens in a lot of churches, this commitment to social justice, any of the issues. And so examining that has become a deconstruction moment, examining how we do it. There's been a lot of challenge in these traditions around mission trips and what those do and why we do them and what's the meaning behind them. And we want to help people, but we want to help people in a way that actually makes sense and actually helps. There's always a joke about the wall in Mexico that's been painted 30 times for every youth group that comes and paints it. What does it mean? So people are re-examining that whole world, including our own denomination. There's been a shift in understanding female leadership for a lot of folks that no longer is making the theological arguments versus like the realities of the world and what that fits. That's been a marker of deconstruction, is folks coming out of traditions that do not ordain women or see women in pastoral leadership. around gender and sexuality and all those things. That's been a marker of deconstruction in traditions. And then just how we talk about God, you know, and using language and imagery and creativeness and expansiveness, that has felt, you know, there's, as opposed to where I believe, like, the more we understand about who God can be and is, as opposed to narrowing down to this is the only way that God can be. These are all markers of anybody going through deconstruction. Some are experiencing this really dramatically, like it is a painful, painful process. Others are walking away completely from faith. Others are landing in other traditions. And so that is one of those things. So I will say that when I have heard from this, there are, like when a person realizes that women can be ordained, I'm like, yeah. There's a little smugness that comes upon me. Social justice, you know, there's a little smug. I mean, I grew up in a social justice church, and folks are like, we should be engaged in social justice. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Women, all these things. But the reality is, you know, we might be able to be a little smug if we as a denomination always ordained women, but we did not. Like, the first ordained women in our denomination are still alive, so it's not as if we were some, you know, forward-thinking, trailblazing people around a lot of things. And so I have to, like, temper my own arrogance about who we are. I love who we are. I love who we, as if you're Presbyterian, who we become as a denomination. But I actually start to come into this place of sorrow and lament because of the pain that folks have been experiencing coming out of these traditions that have confined what I think is their spiritual growth and their understanding and connection to God. And I actually put the blame on us, that we have not told the story well enough to have new people hear it. And we can either blame them for not hearing it, or we can look at ourselves to think about how do we go about sharing the gospel story in a way that folks who have not known it before, who have known it differently, are drawn to it. And I think that's the story of this book and of just my entire ministry, is wanting to share gospel that folks are compelled to be part of. And I would think that at a certain level, that's what we all want. We, like, if you're engaged in your faith life and you don't think it's worth having somebody else experience, why is that? Like, or do you think that what you've experienced in the church and how it's transformed you is something that you would like for other people to experience as well? Yeah, David.
Well, isn't one of the markers of reading the Bible literally?
Oh, is that one of the markers? Yes, yeah, that is certainly. So so markers of getting away from the literalism. That's a really hard one because that is in that last, like, expansive understanding of God. If you read the Bible literally, I'll read a little bit later, and then you all of a sudden say, but God is more than just those 3 lines or whatever, then it's like, well, wait a minute. And like that just starts to expand our mind a little bit. Yeah. All right. So have you yourself gone through this? Have you seen it in your community, friends, culture? Like, how have any of you experienced this, been adjacent to it, and how have you responded or understand that to happen? Anyone? Let's go up here. Let's grab a mic.
I beat you. I'm not sure if this will contribute, but my head is exploding. So when I think of deconstruction, I think about lit crit. I think about Derrida and things like that. So I have to reconfigure what we're talking about. But I also hear and I embrace what you're talking about. You talk about your experience of Presbyterian USA. I was born and raised on the island, and in pursuit of education, PhD, all that kind of silliness, ended up for 35 years at the University of Edinburgh.
Yep.
So when I think about Presbyterian, I think Church of Scotland.
Sure.
I think underneath John Knox's tree, you know, it's a 1,000-year-old tree that he hid from persecution to pursue this idea of what became Presbyterian, perhaps Presbyterian, but not USA. So it is actually, in its own way, Presbyterianism, or the Church of Scotland, and they were responsible for so many wonderful things, so many immigration plans, supported immigration, supported poverty, all of this kind of stuff, but it came to America, and America is not where Presbyterianism came from. So the idea of it being completely and utterly normal in a Scottish culture, where I lived, for men and women to do different things because they simply did. Mm-hmm. And doing different things simply because they did wasn't in their own selves being against women or pro-men. So in some ways, what we're dealing with is not actually deconstructed far enough back sometimes.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm looking at people who are coming out of, so yes, so Presbyterianism, and when Presbyterianism also came over, really it adopted Puritan roots, right? And so that's where you get Calvinists and kind of, right? So what I'm really talking about deconstruction in our culture today is about those who are coming out of these kind of evangelical, kind of like, who are the people that we, I think, are called to be with today, right? So I think there is some of that. You're certainly not wrong. Many things can be true at the same time. But what I'm thinking at is, who are the folks now that are seeing their faith backgrounds over the last 20 or 30 years, re-examining what that is for them? So have you ever?
I guess what I really wanted was a little bit more I suppose what I was trying to do is take in consideration, as you have in yours, in Chinese and the Filipino, my son is Filipino, you know, so I get kind of the rich mix. But I was also saying for people maybe around in this room, they don't have nearly the sort of rich mix of living in California. Their heritage is more like, I mean, as an American who lived abroad for so long, this congregation is far more like the old Presbyterians. They're open, they're accepting, they're embracing, but for them to deconstruct is a very different.
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying, I'm not questioning whether this place has deconstructed.
But I was just saying, even when we talk about deconstruction in a great way, yes, go ahead, let's do this, use big hammers and all that. It's also really nice to give grace to the people who came before us and
Sure.
say that they
I'm not pushing back on.
The pushback is that we sometimes view people who lived before us or even the generation before us as having been closed-minded. When
Okay,
even
I'm very curious about this. What have I said that has said the previous generation was closed-minded?
What I'm hearing is when you were talking about the pain or the suffering or the growth of other people, and like your home church, if you went in and you told your home church what they were open to growth, it would cause pain.
Yeah.
But we also are, who are they? I mean, who are they that we should?
And did you hear the grace extended was that
grace extended?
I was not going to do that.
But can we do that to people that we don't know in our churches that we didn't grow up in?
Yes. So this is what I'm saying. So this is why I'm pushing back on you a little bit, is because I have not talked about these being people from previous generations, right? These are folks who are probably right around you, who are experiencing deep pain from traditions that have caused that and are going through this. So this is their story about what they're experiencing. And for me, it's in how are we there for them? So, I think we got to extend grace for everyone. But anyway, let's keep going. We had a couple hands over here.
Hey Bruce, it's Derek again. It's funny when we talk about deconstruction or thinking backward and what are some things that we've learned or we've taken, and I use the word misconception a lot sometimes, but one of the things we have in this church is an event called I'm going to call it Bibles and Beverages, because not everybody likes beer. But sit together and we start to deconstruct things, even as far back as the Old Testament, and think about the time when that happened compared to today, and how the Bible is sometimes used as a platform, and sometimes incorrectly, to justify things that happen or don't happen in the world today. And to me, that's what's great and unique about being Presbyterian, is that we do ask questions, and it's okay to ask questions and to sit together and discuss things so that we can have a better concept of what the Bible really means today.
Yep. It's good Presbyterian, or good mainliner. I mean, I think that, we're taught in seminary, when you're in seminary, in a mainline seminary, and folks have grown up in traditions different than that, and then the first thing they hear about is how David was not just a wonderful human, and that all these things, not David. Well, actually, it might have been this David, but no. But you hear about King David, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, full humanity in the most terrible and good thing. And you can just feel like people's Sunday school kind of version of things just being overwhelming. And for some places, like that's where we grew up. Like, you grew up in churches that, allow young people to ask those questions. But in some places, that is not the experience that they had. And so that opening a place where you can actually do that is one way that you're addressing some of these issues. Yeah, Grace.
So what I struggle with is that I have a lot of friends who I wouldn't even say that I would like for them to be deconstructing, because instead what's happening is just absolute abandonment, right? They're hurt and they're done. And that question, how have you responded? I don't feel like I can do much, because I don't understand that. I mean, when a good friend, he just got really at me one time, and he was like, Grace, I love you, but that you work in a church is just gonna bother me. And I'm like, oh, okay, what's going on? And then he told this horrible story about his friend who had experienced horrible sexual abuse from a priest in his church, and he's like, so that's what the church but how can I say nuh-uh when that is his experience? So when I see people deconstructing and asking questions, that's awesome. Where my heart breaks is just, they've been so hurt that they just need to run away. And I get it, but how do we respond to that? Because I didn't have an answer.
Yeah, no, I think that is what we're seeing a lot of folks are like, complete rejection of all things Christianity and church, because all they've known is this one version, which is why I think that's an even more compelling reason for us to tell our story differently and more effectively, so that it is not the primary cultural narrative that is in the world these days. And so I think that is part of it. Other folks, do you have friends, family, children?
Not friends, family, and children, and I'm not sure this is really relevant, but it occurs to me that we lost members because of the way we responded to COVID. And I guess they didn't feel they were part of a community because we were not worshiping together. So that was hurtful. It was hard to make sense of that. Those who felt we're doing the best we can.
Yeah. And I think the COVID was one of those times where I think our churches were really courageous. I will say that in that, again, that book of order at the beginning for the Presbyterians, when it says be the church at the risk of its own death, again, I think you make choices. Churches all around the world had to make these choices about when to feel, like when it made sense for a congregation to be back in person. And I think folks made choices that knew that it could lead to people leaving, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I mean, I think that sometimes you make those decisions, but I know this was really hard for people. And I'll just give you, I have very strong feelings about COVID. I was hospitalized, almost died, and yeah, he does have pictures, yeah. People knew I was still okay because I was still posting. But I was prone, like, for 2 weeks, and but I think some of our churches made very courageous decisions knowing that folks would leave over that, and I actually commend our congregations that chose that. So I know that was hard, for sure. Yeah, go for it.
I came from a Baptist background, so my mom and I were at a Baptist church until I was in my teens. But
Southern or American?
Southern.
Southern.
And I think the realization later in my life that the whole idea of bad things happen to people and that's because they deserve those things, and the ignorance around systematic oppression in any way was definitely a veil lifted, something I never even considered in my life, being raised in that environment, and something has, kind of broken that all up for me, and I maybe sort of rejected Christianity for quite a while after that realization. So coming back to a church where I felt I was not familiar with anything that wasn't Baptist really, or Catholic, because that was the other part of my family. This was such a breath of fresh air coming here and seeing people who cared about other people and recognized that bad things do not happen to bad people only, and that was powerful.
Yeah.
So.
Great. That's important as well. You got to have your, That was great. I mean, these are the, I'm curious, can I ask you, can you keep the mic here? I'm just going to, can I ask you, so this is a wonderful end to often a story that doesn't happen, right? Often folks reject and then just never come back. But what brought you back to be, like, was there a part of you that knew you were always still curious about faith, or like what brought you back into the space? You're like, I can give this another try or whatever.
My husband.
Okay. Yeah.
And we didn't go to church together. That wasn't something we experienced together. Having our children, I think we felt the need for a new community, a new family for our children, and I would like to say we shopped. We didn't. We came here, and it was like Palm Sunday or something like that, and it was amazing, and the kids were ringing bells, and we had this 5-month-old, that one, and
that one.
It was, it was amazing, and that's what I wanted. That's the family I wanted her to grow up in.
Yeah. Great. I mean, that's that last night we were talking about belonging, right? Sometimes you just know. Your options are not as great in some places, and if you didn't, but you kind of, sometimes you walk into a space and you just know. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have, go in the back.
When you mentioned, have we told the story enough? I hear people talk about Christianity and my hackles go up and I just kind of, I wonder if perhaps we're talking too much and we need to do more.
So can I ask you, so when you hear people talk, is that like from like-minded Christians or similar ilk of Christians, or a different kind of Christian version?
A different kind of Christian.
Okay.
We are right. We have the answer.
Yeah.
You just listen to me, and this is the way it says so right in here. This is the way I don't want to hear that.
Right.
I want to see how they treat people.
Now, is that, so I'm going to, I love this stuff. So, is that the way you would do it?
Which way?
If you were to talk about your faith with
I'm
someone.
not talking about my faith very much. I just.
If somebody says, "Hey, I hear you go to church. Tell me about your faith." How is that? I'm not telling you to do that now, but is that how you would come off to them? Do you think?
I'm not sure. I'm just not comfortable talking about my faith very much, and I think that's the case with a lot of people.
Yep.
I would talk more about the community of people that are in the church that I go to,
Right.
and how
Which is
wonderful
talking
they are.
about your faith.
It is, but I think.
So
people
so here's why we have abdicated that voice in the world, because we have decided that it's either that way that none of us wants. You don't want to be perceived. Is it Nancy?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, look at that.
Very good.
Woo! Okay, I'm going home now. My work is done. Wow, I'm even impressed with myself. That happens all the time, though. So, what I want to push us today is to think about this reality that I think that we have become unable to share our faith in a way that is not built around not being like that. I think when we talk about evangelism and the Presbyterians and mainline kind of spaces, like I'm talking about center kind of mainstream Christianity, we so much don't want to be those kind of Christians. So Like, we either think you got to be on a sandwich board with a microphone on the corner or do nothing. And there is a lot in between there. And when we are thinking about how we share our faith, and that I think we have to figure out, like, if you all know Nancy, if she talks about faith, do you think she's going to come off as this person who says, we have the right way? Like, that is, I don't know you well, but my first impressions of you are that is not how you're going to come off. If somebody talks to you about, you go to church, can you tell me about this? You're going to lead with, well, you know, I go to church because this community kind of takes care of each other. We know each other. We're not perfect, but, you know, in crisis, this is where I would go. This is the family. This is all of those things. And it wouldn't include, and we have the absolutely right way for the world to operate today. Now, because that's not who you are. And my challenge for us today is to begin to think about how you talk about your faith with people who I think are desperately looking for something that is more grounded in something else than the rhetoric of the world right now. I think there's great opportunity for that to happen. I'm going to keep going. So,
I'm just going to interrupt real
go
quick. Amy, if there is anything from online people, I'm sorry, online people, I've been immersed. So if there's any questions or anything from online, then just please put it in the chat, and Bruce would be happy to respond, and Amy will get that across. Does that sound good? Okay, good. All right. I realized I hadn't said hi in a while. Okay, thanks.
All right, so one more question, and we take a break. When the broader culture and people you work with around you, when they think of Christianity, what do you think comes to mind? Judgmentalism.
Yes, and anything that the evangelical fundamentalists, because they get in front of the cameras, they're better at technology, they haven't conceded the space. Mainline Christians have conceded the space, and so I hear that back, right? You guys are judgmental, you don't care about people, you only care about, and I'm like, well, actually, you're just saying what is mostly on social media and camera.
Yeah. Or the threads that you're following on social media, right? Or what the algorithms want us to see. Yeah, and it's hard not to, when somebody says Christians are like this, first they're like, nuh-uh, right? I mean, it's a hard, because you're put on the defensive with having to prove them wrong. But yes, and I'm not saying they're right or wrong at this point. I'm like, this is the perception, right? This is what, here and then over here. Go for it.
Hi, I think I'm surrounded by people who think of a Christianity that does not engage in interfaith dialogue, is not willing to examine other wisdom traditions or be in dialogue with those of other faith traditions beyond the Christian denomination.
Right. Yep, okay. So
and what we can learn from that.
Yeah. Other things around you that
And I think we have a feeling that faith is private. I think it's very personal.
Yeah, different.
But I don't think it's private.
Right.
Particularly it's called to be into a community. So don't ask me about my faith. It's just between me and God.
Right. Sure. What else are people saying? Oh, here, yep.
If you do a lot of volunteer work, typically people that are volunteer are church people.
Yeah.
A few years ago, we were reading that book, 3 Cups of Tea, and what they left out is they didn't talk about any temple sisterhoods, any church workers. It was all emphasized on other people doing service work, and it left the Christians and the Jews out. But when you go out, if you do a lot of volunteer work, typically you have people with a church connection. And
when you do that volunteer work, do people talk about their church world, or is that just something we kind of know that's where, like, how does it get transmitted?
I don't know, but there's Christians tend to want to do service.
Yeah. So. Okay. Great. Other folks, how do your friends, community, world, when they hear about Christianity, what are they thinking, or perceptions? Yep. Go for it here.
Dad Thank you. I'm thinking maybe they think, oh, there's all those rules and regulations, and you have to get up on Sunday morning.
Yeah. Seriously. Right? I mean, there's not just the theological, political stuff. It's like Sunday morning. Like when I'm in church usually 3 Sundays a month, but when I go out on that Sunday that it's not church time, I'm like, oh, this is where everybody is. Wherever I go, I'm like, oh, they're hanging out here. They're hanging out here. But yeah, that's good. Yep, over here.
Someone online says they know we are Christians by our love.
Well,
Okay, so for me, I am surrounded by people who think various different things, being a high schooler. I have people like Mrs. Kalina has people around her who would immediately say, no, this is my idea, this is right. What you think is not necessarily wrong, but very different, and I don't like it. But then I also have people around me who say, yeah, I'm never going to church ever again. I was very hurt by that community. They did not accept me. And I think it hurts my heart that there are people in the world who can't accept others' beliefs or don't feel accepted by God, because it's the people around us who are taking, I think, God's word in different ways than maybe would be kinder.
yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Others, we'll take a couple more, or one more. Go ahead. We'll do one more, and then I'm going to move on.
This is kind of important for Michigan right now, but we have a legislator that brought up a resolution to end same-sex marriage.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that's a big one. But I would say that in previous lives, in my work life and that sort of thing, the attack on Christianity was very much, to the tune of there's no hate like Christian love. And it really, we have the perspective of us is that we are very closed-minded, and that we are, and Sophia's saying it too, and the ladies at this table here, that we are unwilling to accept any other realities but our own. We're unwilling to accept that there are other ways to express your Christianity, and that anyone's wrong. But that's very much the background that I came from as well. It was a very hurtful Christianity.
Yeah, thank you. So I ask this not because I think that's who we are, right? I think there can be an immediate but that's not who we are. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point, right? If that's not how we want to have Christianity be perceived, then we have to tell the story differently, because the reality is this is like when you turn on the news, you watch anything, the reality is there is a version of Christianity out there that is not generally the kind that are shared in mainline churches, Presbyterians in particular, but just in general, kind of you hear about it, this nationalism kind of Christianity headed to theocracy. That's not who I don't think we want to be. And so part of us is, the reality is they're not thinking about us. We are not in front of the cameras enough, and I'm not saying that that's what we need to do particularly, but we have failed to share the story in a way that impacts people. I think in many ways we think we're too good for it. I will tell you, I had a chance to be on Fox, and I said I didn't want to do it. And this is for this book actually, and they're like, dude, if we get you on Fox, you're going on. And I was like, I'm not sure I could do it. And then they eventually canceled on me, so it wasn't I internally felt this thing of I don't want to engage people who probably disagree with me greatly. And so I was like, it's still in me that I am not. So I think part of it is we have to figure out how we go about telling the story. So when we come back, I'm going to take a break. We're done talking about what we're not. And so what we're going to go into is we're going to begin to talk about who we are and what we believe so that we can tell the story better. I start here because that's the realities of where we are, but what we really need to get to is learning who we are and what we believe Because that's a more compelling story than when somebody says something about the church and we say, but we're not that. Rather to say, well, we're community, we're this is what we believe. And so we'll talk about some theological concepts when we're back. So let's go take a break. Be back in, is that right? Yes, be back at 11, all right? So you have a good 12-minute break, all right? There we go.
Andrew Palmerville was here. He's the president of Blue.
Okay, one quick announcement. There are so many of us here, which is great, but if you feel comfortable, would you please get off at the Wi-Fi? Because we've got so many people using it that our online streaming isn't streaming as well. So airplane mode or just off the Wi-Fi, whatever works for you would be fantastic. Thank you.
give you a walk when I get home.
So anyway, she's pretty high energy. She's learning the leash manners, but she was a stray, so she's also learning house training, to be honest. But is so tree motivated that like the fact that she hoops and you get like joyful. She's like, look what I did! Like you can tell she's like, I get trees now. But I have been throwing like the ends of our lettuce out in the yard for the rabbits for the last few weeks. And last night found like the end of a romaine head and was just like throwing it in the air. She was so excited and then ate it before we came in. I'm like, this is so bad. We don't do that anymore.
Well, you know, with Luna, her deal now can be total creature of habit. After I have lunch every day, carrots. So she gets 5 carrots after lunch, the little baby one. And after dinner, she gets 5 more carrots. And if I have lunch and walk away without giving her the carrot, when she gets started with the barking, like, you forgot something. Yeah. So, that's what
We haven't heard her voice yet. She runs at us, but we don't know what her bark is. So this is day 3. We haven't heard it yet. So
that's good if they stop.
Yeah. She just never heard it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what her like just get being right now. It's just like little puffs and grunts and stuff. We call it. Her name is Bumblebee, by the way. We're calling her Bumble Grumbles, but she's so cute, right?
Okay, well, I look forward to it. Luna will look forward to it too, you know, that another new dog.
Right. And she's nice. She's a nice woman too. So.
Luna always wants to make new friends. So.
She came in, they told us not to introduce the cat for 3 days. Well, it's going to be a little bit hard for her. We'll try. And she was in the house for, I think just in an hour. We're like, let's try the cat. And so we let the cat out.
But you're comfortable. All right, if we could go ahead and get back, come on back to your tables. We got 2 more sections to do. Dun, dun, dun. Woo! All right. Come on. Oh, we're going to start as soon as Bruce refills his coffee. He forgot. Okay, all right. Thank you all for hanging in. I don't like Nancy anymore because I remembered her name, but please do not hold me to that standard for the rest of you. Please continue to introduce yourselves.
And also, please, again, check your Wi-Fi. Wait, yes.
Yep.
Check your Wi-Fi and get off of that. We've got, somehow we got more people after I made the announcement. So I don't know if you're just really rebellious. And you guys just said, you don't get to tell me what to do.
Oppositional behavior.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, I'm not trying to be your boss, just trying to help our online folks. So turn off your Wi-Fi. Thank you.
I am completely unfamiliar with oppositional behavior.
That's not you, yeah.
Don't know. That's not most of my family, apparently. All right, all. So let's do just a few minutes before I jump into the next section. AMA, ask me anything about what you've heard, responses, anything else we haven't covered that you're just like, oh, I want to make sure I ask something about this. Grace, go for it.
I remember from our class on Sunday, what does it mean if someone says, I'm a progressive liberal Christian? What does progressive mean? And if someone isn't progressive, are they stagnant? Or what is that? So we're wondering about vocabulary.
Yeah, vocabulary. Vocabulary is a hard thing. I think, so here's some things I think about vocabulary. One, it is a privilege to say I don't want to have any labels. That is because I think we're assuming that some people don't want to have. So before I get to the progressive Christianity thing, for instance, I have a book over there I wrote earlier called But I Don't See You as Asian, because folks would come up to me often and say, but I don't see you as Asian. And I'd be like, but I've just shared significant stories about my Asian American background, and what you have now told me is I don't see any of that. And as if it's bad. Now, I don't want you to see me only as that, right? The reason I share so much about various parts of who I am is because we all have that multiplicity of story, right? So if you share your story about your ancestors who came from X country and you happen to share that with me, if I said, oh, what about I don't see you as that? Like, that doesn't matter, I just see you as this. I get where that's coming from. That's coming from a place of I just want to see your humanity, this person right in front of me. But we also have to realize that we all bring things to that place that we want you to see. We want you to embrace that. What we don't want, right, is for, I'll stay with my Asian-ness, is for, you see this and then you just make assumptions about what that is. The number of people that have come to me and spoken other Asian languages to me that are neither Chinese or Filipino, Tagalog, is, we do this out of this deep yearning to want to connect to each other. But I just chuckle. It's like, I don't understand Chinese, one. So whenever somebody speaks Chinese to me, I'm just shamed. And Tagalog, I can track a little bit, but I certainly am not a fluent speaker of Tagalog. But I had no idea how to speak any other Asian languages of any sort. So I think it's nuanced and it's complicated, so around all labels. But I don't think we want to be in a place where we don't have them at all, because it gives us definition. So when it comes to faith language, it's not easy to say, like, progressive Christianity. So I'll tell you a little bit about the book. The publisher markets it as a sweeping primer of progressive Christianity. I never really do, because that leaves too much open to interpretation. But I will say that when we talk about progressive Christianity, it generally is going to be a place that is tends to be more open to general, and this is why the problematic, generally more open around justice issues, around LGBTQA things, around expansiveness of who God is. But that doesn't mean that all progressive spaces are. I am not a fan of churches labeling themselves publicly as a progressive church. I'm more of a fan of churches stating clearly what they believe, so that people don't have to guess what progressive means. Now, I think that some churches will label themselves, for instance, I'll go something like, well, are you a Bible preacher? And I'm like, I don't know what that means. I know what you want it to mean, right? So I will always ask, if somebody says, are you a Bible preacher? And I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? Right? I'll always come back and say, well, is that a progressive church? And then I would say, well, tell me what you think is progressive, and then I'll tell you whether that is our church. Or you can look online and you can see the things that we've taken stands on, what's not there, what is there, that may align with some of those things you consider progressive or not. So I think that part of it is the language helps us in a very general way to give context. So if I go to a space, I always ask whoever's inviting me, tell me a little bit about the congregation. Like, what are you going through? How would you describe yourself? If I walked in for the first time, what am I seeing? And folks give me a little bit of space, give me a little bit of experience about what is happening. If somebody just says, well, we're a pretty progressive congregation, I will always ask, so what does that look like in the context of your particular church? And that's the piece where I would say to you all, if you're struggling with that language is, I'd be like, well, if you call yourself a progressive church, you may not, but if you did, well, what does that actually look like? Because that means something very different to someone else. And so I think this is important for your PNC folks, right, is that even if you put whatever, like being as specific as possible about who you really are is the most attractive thing to people when they're looking for church, whether it's leadership or actually, looking for a church. So even if it says something like, we're really struggling right now with da-da-da-da, and we are in the middle of trying to figure out this, that is such a refreshing, real, genuine kind of description of a place that could be really attractive if folks are like, oh, this is a church that knows it's not perfect, and they are struggling with what it means to be a community. I might be interested in figuring out in a place like that that's trying to do it well, right? Rather than to just say, we're fine, because no church is. So I think that progressive language, the same thing goes for conservative. You'll hear me talk a lot about and write a lot about the fact that, I'll talk about this tomorrow on Sunday, that one of the things that we do to each other is we one-dimensionalize one another into our particular ideologies. That's why when I talk about deconstruction, I listed a bunch of things. I just didn't say, this is evangelical, but these are things that folks are experiencing. It's not a complete list. But I think that when I hear about a conservative, right, whatever that may mean, one that's shifted over the years, what that means, depending on where you've been and all that. But also that we can't one-dimensionalize somebody that we even disagree with because of their ideological, theological, political space, because that strips them away from the dignity that God has given every human being. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't challenge each other, and it doesn't mean that we can't hold each other accountable, but it does mean that I am not just going to see you as this particular statement, this particular vote. I don't have to have coffee with you and become your best friend and sit down and have conversation, but I'm not going to simply dismiss you because you are labeled as this or this. So that's a long-winded answer to the language we use about each other is nuanced and it's complicated, but that is what we have. And so the best thing is to define your own story for others, to tell your story in the way you want it to be told, and listen for how people are telling that story. Because then we kind of get to the heart of what it means to be the body of Christ and God's people together. All right, I'll take a couple more.
Thank you.
Ask me anything. Anybody who hasn't asked any questions yet? Nobody's asked me about the Oakland A's, but that's okay. Yes, go for it.
Your favorite Ricky Henderson story?
Oh. So for those of you that, so this is where I am now in that age. I was just at the gym last weekend and we were chatting and they're like, so are you still working? Like, yes. I mean, they were clearly thought I was retirement age. I said, I'd like to be retirement age. I'm getting to the age where even in sports, some people had no idea who Ricky Henderson was, and that broke my heart. So Ricky Henderson, Oakland A's, New York Yankees, Toronto Blue Jays, but with the A's, he broke Lou Brock's all-time steal record, and I was at that game. And so Ricky Henderson was one of those players that would get on base and disrupt everything on the field. You could just see pitchers who were nervous about him stealing second base, and it was so fun. And he's the kind of person that you hated if he was on the other team, and you loved when he was on yours. Cocky, arrogant, did all the things would taunt pitchers. It was great when he's on your team, and you hate it when he's on. But when everybody knew it was coming, and again, sports, professional sports, college sports in some levels, is all about money, and that is our understanding. So notwithstanding that, that was one of the most beautiful baseball memories I have ever had, is watching him steal that base and the whole crowd kind of like watching it happen with him and raising the base above his head and all those kind of things. I'm getting chills now. Thank you for asking me an Oakland A's question that didn't bring up rage for me. There you go. My kids were, just one more A's thing. So my kids were raised in San Francisco. 30 years were in San Francisco. And they were Oakland A's fans. I mean, this is, you call it indoctrination or parenting, whatever. We call it just good parenting. And they were bullied for years because they would wear their A's gear proudly to school and everything, and folks were like, how could you? You're San Francisco. And so they're even madder than I am about the A's because they had to put up with so much growing up. Yeah, my middle kid is furious. But anyway. All right, last question, and this doesn't have to be A's. Yeah, go for it over here, David.
Well, Grace asks about progressive Christianity. This church was birthed from Fort Street, yeah, and because they needed a Reformed Presbyterian congregation on the island.
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
Well, that was also during the time, so I'll just say the crest of Christianity and Christendom in the United States, we have reached that crest and we are on the other side. So for those who would say we need to get back to the denomination being over 2 million people, that is not going to happen, right? So I am one that you just mentioned about success and efficiency, was that, or effectiveness, yeah. That I think I believe in measurables, I believe in accountability to our actions and having goals and all of that, but they need to be, one, realistic, and two, they need to be more about impact. And I think we focus so much on growth, and that comes out of a time when we believed that there needed to be a Presbyterian, if not Reformed, but Presbyterian presence in every community where there were already other churches that existed. So everybody is competing for these places as if that was going to be in perpetuity the need for that kind of experience. So those 50s and 60s, we were in our heyday, like even into the 70s a little bit, then you start to hit the 80s and decline begins to happen and you're beginning to see it, and we are now closing churches and all those kind of things. So when it means to have a Reformed tradition in that area, we really believe that our particular understanding of theology, our particular understanding of Christology, and who Christ is in the world and who Christ is in our community is uniquely different than, say, the Lutherans. And so right now, can anybody tell me what the difference between, any of us, between the difference between us and a Lutheran church? So tell me what's one of the differences?
The way we're structured governmentally.
Yep.
So we, of course, as a Presbyterian, right, we have representational.
Yep.
We have representational, and then whereas in the Lutheran church, it's more hierarchical.
Yep. So the Lutherans have bishops, right? So Lutherans have bishops. There's a council of bishops. So the Lutherans make decisions faster than us denominationally because it's their council gets together, and that's 24. I don't remember, maybe 12. I can't remember. I don't pay attention that closely, but it's not big. And so they decide, and then that becomes rule for the denomination, right? So it's governance. That's a governance difference. Anything else? Liturgy. Tell me about liturgy. What do you mean? Okay, a microphone. Sorry for the Zoom people.
Liturgy in the quote-unquote higher churches like the Episcopalians, Catholics, Lutherans, they have a set liturgy, and they have set, they read the Bible through.
So when somebody new comes in and says, "What's liturgy?"
It's the format of their service, and the format of the service is repeatable throughout the United States, and the difference is the homily, or the part where the person who's in charge will speak what they believe they've heard in the Word of God.
Yep. So there's worship traditions, there's worship styles. So other traditions, the Lutherans use a daily book of prayer. So their prayers are common across all of their churches on a particular day. I know that not all Lutherans use it, but that's the kind of the understanding is that you all have a common, and we don't have that. We have Presbyterians, we have a lectionary, a revised common lectionary, so there's common scripture, but not everybody uses that. So we don't have the same content. Anything, And is there anything theological that's the difference? Yep.
They've become much more like Catholics recently than they were when they first started.
Good for the mic with that, so I can repeat. Yep.
My understanding is the Lutherans have become much more like Catholics. They've adopted a lot of Catholic, well, you talked about bishops, but adopted a lot of Catholic doctrine.
Oh, interesting. I've not heard that. I think they've always trended liturgically towards that. I mean, their investments, and they have all of the smells and bells where we don't. I was at an ecumenical thing, this is years ago, like this, when I was a moderator. So I got access to these things that nobody would have ever invited a 39-year-old Asian American from the West Coast to go to. And I remember you could always tell the Presbyterians because we just had our black robes on. And everybody else had all this other stuff on. And we're always like, we want fun stuff. Like, where's our fun stuff? But yeah, so I'm not sure it's been a recent trend. And I think there's been, across the board, a lot of folks are recapturing some spiritual disciplines and things around that. But they certainly lean liturgically and vibe more than towards the Catholics. Yes, sir. Microphone, and then.
They have their own financial arm. It's like a big credit union. Investments, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So here's when I asked that question, right?
All private.
Right. So the theological differences are very slight, except for communion. Communion is the biggest one. Have you ever heard the phrase, the difference of one iota? Do you know where that? Well, I'm going to tell you where it comes from. So homoousios, homoiousios. This is the only Greek I ever remember. In communion, do we believe that the body of Christ is the bread and the cup? Like, where is Christ in our communion services? Right. So like, what is it? Others like what? Where is Christ in our communion? We celebrate communion tomorrow. Where is Christ? Everywhere, right? In our hearts, in this, right. But the Lutherans, where is Christ? In the bread. That E, I don't know that iota. I don't know actually what it does in the official language. Somebody smarter than I. But that places Jesus in the bread, right? So that's a very different kind of theological piece. Go for it, and then we'll end.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, we ought to distinguish Lutherans here.
Yeah, that is true.
We are in communion with ELCA. And
Look at you.
They're really not different us, and we can exchange pastors and exchange Missouri Synod and Wisconsin.
Yes.
We have a difference.
Oh, now you want to dive deep. But yes, you're right. There are different Lutheran. So what I want to get to, right, is that at this point, we used to believe that every one of these groups had to have a presence. And that homoiousios was so important somewhere in our head that we needed to actually have a community there. Those days are gone. Like, I think that now, if you're talking about Missouri Lutheran Synod, which is a much more conservative kind of Missouri Lutheran setting, that's different than, say, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. But so that's part of why when you go to small towns, there's one of each, and that's what we did, and that is no longer sustainable. And so we are in communion with various denominations. Not all of them, interestingly enough. The Episcopals voted us down and we're not in full communion with the Episcopal Church. But the Lutherans, we both said to each other, sure, we can switch pastors. But the Episcopals decided, that's okay. We said yes, and then they're like, swipe left, whatever. So, but yes, so that is what. Anyway, so I'm going to keep going because we do have stuff to cover. Okay, so let me tell you quickly about the book, and then I'm going to read a couple things. So, as I shared yesterday, I was looking for might be next for me. So my pastoral story is when I was about to turn 50. I decided I was going to go back to a church, and I had one more big call in me. Like, got one more to do before I retire. And my youngest child at that point, Annie, was a rising junior in high school, and we talked to her. My kids had never had to move because of a call. All my calls had been in the Bay Area or drivable, so they never had to experience that pastor-kid thing where you're moving every whatever. We asked Annie, it's like, hey, Annie, Dad's thinking about like I knew going to a church, what are you open to? And she said, we could go anywhere in the United States. I'm like, fine, we can just do it. And like for a sophomore in high school to be like, yeah, sure, let's do it. I'm like, okay. So we ended up doing that. I ended up at a church in Palo Alto, just down the road. Wasn't far at all. And he switched schools. And then I shared earlier, served there during COVID, and we thrived during that time, unfortunate reasons, but of course we did really well during that time. And then I got COVID about 3.5 years now, was hospitalized. In our denomination, there were 3 or 4 of us that all went in at the same time. The spouse of one of our good friends, Gerard Lowry, his wife went in. This well-loved music leader in Louisville, Kentucky, went in, and I was the only person to come out alive. It was still the time where when people went to the hospital, you didn't know. Like this was Delta, if you remember. That feels like a million years ago, but fully vaccinated. I probably would have died had I not been. In any case, I came back to the church, and for about a year, 4 months I was on oxygen. 6 months I was still dragging a canister around, and the church was generous. They were like, take as long as you need. You come back whenever you want. It was a wealthy congregation, super progressive, one of our most in our denomination. So we were doing great work, and then I decided I couldn't do it. I was sleeping far more than just needed to. I'd move at 100 miles an hour anyway, and it just wasn't good. So I left there. I took about a year before I was like, what am I going to do next? Wrote the kindness book, and then I started to write my statement of faith, because in our denomination, in order for you to get a call, you have to write a new statement of faith. So I started writing it, and I'm at the stage in my career where I was like, I'm going to write it however I want, and they can take it or leave it. So I started writing this thing, and as I do, I was sharing it online as I was going, and Broadleaf then asked me, they saw it, and they're like, hey, this could be a book. And I was like, that's not what the intention was, but I started to write, and that's where it came out. So it's written as a faith statement and as a montage to kind of capture all of Christianity. So they asked if I would begin to do this. And so there are a couple key things about the book. Is one that we'll do in just a minute, that it's not centered on what we're not. I think far too many theological conversations within kind of this center kind of faith tradition, we center what we're not more than we center what we are and what we believe. And so really wanted to have some kind of primer that was based on what do we believe about things versus, well, we're just not that. So that's what it is. It is, what I tried to do was to talk about faith that's both a personal, David mentioned earlier, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and a communal one. I grew up in a church that was much more about the communal relationship with Jesus, that we didn't really talk about this personal relation with Jesus, because then that would have made us like those kind of Christians. And I think that's a detriment to our faith, that we have to have both in order to have the fullness of who we are. So I try to weave those two together. There's also not a Jesus section and then a justice section. Everything is woven in, because that is the tradition that raised me and what I believe is a version that is more meaningful. That, in fact, my work around justice and activism comes directly from who I understand Jesus to be. And like I talked about yesterday, is like that's an attractive thing for people, not just about activism, but that our belief dictates our action versus the other way around. So I hope to do that. And then I just wanted it to be a resource for people who are exploring faith. The original target for this group were people who have deconstructed faith, but were still curious about faith. That it was for folks who were new to Christianity. As a church planter, I always wanted a book that I could give to people, and like, we just need a starter. What is that? And it would always have to be, I'd say like, well, you can read this. This is by this guy named Migliori. It's super academic, but it covers everything. Or here's another one, and I'd have to have all these disclaimers. And all I wanted was to be able to, like, this is something that's super accessible, and covers almost everything. So that's what this is. Key theological things in this is when I was approached about this book, they said, could you write a book on Christianity? And I was like, the whole thing? And they're like, yeah, can you do the whole thing in 40,000 words? I mean, you're getting to know me now. I'm like, sure, I could do that, no problem. So I said, yes, sure, why not? We could do that. So it really is the sweeping. We mentioned almost everything. There, even if it doesn't give anything in depth, it's mentioned because people are going to ask about it. And so even if I don't focus on it, like I don't focus on the Trinity at all, but I have one sentence in there that talks about why. Right? Why the Trinity is not a biblical concept. Like you're never finding anything in the Bible that says, here's how you should believe in God, right? It's a way we've understood it and it's valuable, but I didn't focus on that. As well as the second coming, I don't talk a lot about the second coming of Jesus. It's important for people, but it's not something. So I mentioned all of that. I explained the sacraments, everything from why we do them to how we do them. So we look at baptism like, well, why is baptism important? Not why is it important to be baptized, which is very different than why is baptism important. And all the way down to, well then, why do some people get fully dunked? Why do some people get sprinkled on? Why, like all the different things. So we go theory to praxis all the way down for sacraments, salvation, resurrection, individuals' faith, all those kind of things. So that's what we try to do in this, in a way that hopefully gives people language. The group that we shared this yesterday, the group that we were not expecting to gravitate towards this book were people like you, people who've been in the church for a while. What we're discovering is the greatest sales are actually to traditional churches, because we've all been in church so long that we maybe have forgotten exactly what things mean or how to talk about them in a way that doesn't feel stunted or unnatural or something. So that has been actually really fun to talk with people about that. Why has my clicker stopped working? What is happening? I love that it says Siri to practice all the way down from sacraments. Why is Siri on? Stop. There we go. Okay. I take on all of the things and then impact on the world, and then, for instance, like God's plan, which I'll tell you more, and then even more things. So let me read you something real quick about the Bible, because I think that is often one of the things that it creates a lot more interaction. Look at my book is falling apart. I love it. We can get you a signed copy. I'm sure you can. All right, this is what it said about the Bible. The Bible tells the breadth and depth of the human experience with God. The Bible both liberates and binds. It's a living conversation and delicate dance between humanity and the Spirit. It's a record of God's story as told by authors who sought to discern God's movement in the story of their people. Yes, it contains beautiful passages that evoke love, hope, joy, and peace, but the Bible also contains the rawness and reality of a world filled with ugliness, despair, sorrow, and destruction. While some prefer a faith devoid of difficulty, strife, and conflict, I find deep comfort in the fact that in the midst of the good and the bad, God still speaks. I do not deny that the Bible has been weaponized to oppress communities, justify violence, systems of violence, and otherwise serve as a handbook for human havoc raising. But I'm not going to start there. I want to start with why I believe the Bible is important. Put simply, the Bible operates as a living guidebook for our lives. The Bible guides us into understanding God's faithfulness to us. While some see Scripture as clear and concise rules for life, I don't. In fact, the Bible is anything but clear or concise. But I do believe that reading Scripture challenges us to dive into discerning God's longings for us in any particular time and circumstance. Most importantly, the Bible communicates God's greatest hopes and intentions for humanity. The Bible is long and complicated enough to embody a multitude of God's hopes for us. When we read the story of Jeremiah, in which God calls a child to speak truth to the world, we might find God calling us too to be prophetic in the face of injustice. As we read about Jesus' constant prayer and study, which often left the disciples confused, we might commit ourselves to practices of self-reflection and discipleship, which may mean following Jesus. In Mark 2, when we read of people going to great lengths to carry their friend to Jesus for healing, we learn what it means to experience belonging. Through the wisdom literature, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs, we are given language for God's beauty, creativity, and expansiveness. Through the Bible, God tells us through human authors, "Here is what I hope you to be and become, and I am with you always." As much as the Bible brings clarity, it also is filled with contradictions. Using the lens of biblical literalism, the belief that the Bible is the exact Word of God, to understand a document written by humans is fundamentally flawed and leads to proof texting and dangerous misapplication. If you're willing to take the text out of context, you can probably support almost any position about anything by using the Bible. The weaponizing of the Bible is one of the most destructive and dangerous parts of Christianity, past and present. For instance, when people claim, quote, biblical marriage, unquote, as a standard in the debates about same-gender marriage, they do so as if there was a singular standard of marriage endorsed by the Bible and thus by God. Newsflash. If we listed the ways in which people engaged in marriage in the Bible, polygamy, incest, sexual violence, and the absence of state-sanctioned marriage at all, most people would not choose to have a biblical marriage. This is where the Spirit comes in, challenging us to interpret Scripture in community and to hold on to nuance. The Spirit reminds us that even though this text was written by human hands over generations and through countless cultures and contexts, the words are as alive today as they were when chisel, quill, or pen was first put to stone, parchment, or paper. Seeing the Bible as a living, breathing container of God's voice to us is not a sign of weakness or an old-fashioned, out-of-date faith. Rather, it is a sign of depth and confidence of faith in God's meaningful presence yesterday, today, and always. So that's what I think about the Bible. And what I try to do throughout this is to take theological concepts and provide some language for us to use together. One of the things I want to make very clear is when I offer this version of Christianity, it is a version. You will never hear me say, this is the version everybody needs to believe, or you will not agree with everything, but this is a version. Just as you will never hear me say about those who profess a different version, one that I completely disagree with and rebuke, I will never say that that is not Christianity. I will never say to someone else that they are not Christian. That is not my job. That is not our job. Our job, I think, is more to discover the version that we believe in and tell that story really well. So that's the Bible. I talk about a couple of other things. I talk about God's plan. One of the things that I think is one of the most dangerous things that we do in not just in churches that we disagree with, but our own, is that we have this concept that our lives are like a chess game and God kind of moves us around, and there's a reason for every tragedy in our lives. And one of the worst things you can tell somebody when tragedy hits is God must have a reason. I mean, if I asked, does anybody experience tragedy in their life? Like, everybody is going to raise your hand. I mean, my brother-in-law 15 years ago was murdered in a workplace shooting in California. And I remember people saying, we just don't know what God's plan is in the midst of this. And I hear that, and I'm just like, this is why. No wonder people run from the church. If we're professing a God that says this is part of the plan, I remember a few of my sermons, but I preached his memorial, and I think the first thing I said was, God does not want us here. Because I think we have to understand that we are not just pawns, and that God's plan for us is constantly being revealed. And we are called into, when I talk about God's plan, we are called into co-collaborating with God. And God has intentions for us and hopes for us and callings for us, and we are trying to discern when we enter into that relationship and journey with God to see what's going to be revealed. We are not, God's not up there moving every single piece around and knows exactly everything that's going to happen. So I talk about that, talk about salvation, salvation, atonement, resurrection. These are often, there are multiple ways that fit within our tradition about atonement, about what the death of Christ meant. We have adopted generally what is called the substitutionary atonement theory, which means that Jesus was substituted for us and that God had given Jesus to substitute on our behalf. There are other ways to think about the ways that Jesus played that intercessory kind of role between us and eternal life. I am one of those that believes in the life, death, and resurrection provides us a path to eternal life with God, and that Jesus' death wasn't about our sin, that it was about what Jesus was doing in the world, created a system that needed to put him to death. And the surprise for everybody was that was not the last word. That death does not have the last word, but new life does, which means also why in this book I make a case for the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I think that people are really shocked. That's like the one thing that folks are like, oh, didn't see that coming. But I actually, and again, you can believe it or not, but I believe in the bodily resurrection because I kind of am one of those that thinks, man, the world is messed up right now. And we will do our best to help right it, but God is going to have to do something miraculous at some point. And the most miraculous thing I know that I could believe in is a body coming back to life. And that is a hopeful thing that I hold on to about the world. So I'll talk about that, as well as give you a little breakdown of all the other atonement theories that are out there, all in 40,000 words. So, and I really do touch on everything. The first version of this book was 70,000 words. And then we had to hone it down. I had to say goodbye to stories that I thought were so good. And my editor's like, doesn't fit here. And I'm like, but it's so good. Preachers, sometimes we have good stories and we just need to figure out how we can tell them. But anyway, 70,000 words down to 40, very concise. I learned a lot about myself in writing this and having to really, what do I believe? So that's that. And then so I'm going to take some questions and then we're going to jump into the last thing. All right, so that's the book. There's a lot of other things in it, but I want to make sure I give you a little bit. All right, other questions? About anything? Yes, go for it. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any advice or insight on a lot of wealth in a church, and I guess I don't want to. There are finance people in the room, and they're staring bullets at me. But I don't want to call it hoarding wealth, but this extreme preservation of everything that we have and our funds and that sort of thing, like not willing to spend the money. That's not what I mean, FYI. Kind of, but not really. But
ish.
Can you say it better? You say it better.
Yeah, no, I get you. I get totally.
I feel like it's not a very Christian, I don't know, thought to hoard the money and it's a fine line because we obviously need to protect our assets, we need to protect our real estate, we need to protect and protect our future, but it may not be our calling to do that by keeping everything like dragons. So I'm just, what is your thought and what is your advice on that?
So, so the question about money in church is always a difficult one. I've worked at all levels of churches. The last church I was at, my salary at First Pres Palo Alto was the entire budget of my home church. Right, so you're looking at, these are realities of all of our churches. Like it was a church that had, First Pres Palo Alto had, I think at that point we had a $3 million endowment, and we would fight. My salary is $3 million. Yes, so you're not offering that. I don't know if you're going to find anyone. No. So we had this endowment of $3 million, and every year we fought over 3.5% or 4% or whatever it was going to be, and there was the same kind of tension and debate about this is so much. Why are we fighting over this? And others like, but it could be less. I mean, there's all kinds of. There's the debate over rainy day. You never know what we're going to need, and then there's others that are like, well, at what point do we need it? Like, what's the rainy day even look like? I mean, these are all like. This is where I want to tell you, you are not unique. Like, this is not like, oh, we are the one. Money, and I mean, if you're in any kind of relationship where you're sharing money things, it's the same thing, right? You're having to, like, what is enough? What's enough savings? What's too much? What's worth spending? So these are very common. So, but I would say that the difficulty ones when there is different understandings of defining what is what. Like, what is, I actually, my wife and I went through a conversation like, let's define what is enough. Let's actually put a number to that. Because then we can decide that above that is what we do to do other things, like whether it's travel or give it away or whatever it's going to do. But let's actually, because what is enough, we need to have enough. That is, like, what is that? If I ask a different person what enough is in a church, you're going to get a variety of answers, especially like if you know where you're starting from right now. Like if you had nothing, and I said, well, $1 million, if I told this last church I was at, if they had nothing, and I were to say, well, there's $1 million gift coming in, is that enough? Everybody would say, yes, that's enough. But they started $3 million. If I said, well, is $1 million enough? Like, no, because we've just lost $2 million, right? I mean, so it becomes this really, so I actually encourage churches to really have good conversations about what is enough. What does it really look like? What do we have to feel like we have enough? And for some people, it will not be enough. Like it's not enough to have, we need to have more. Others, it's gonna be like it's still too much. But you gotta find that place. And I actually really believe in naming a number and having that conversation, because then it takes all the ambiguity about, we're saving too much money. And we're like, well, we're not saving enough. And I'm like, well, what is enough? And that way, you have a huge plant. Like, what does it mean to tend to it well? What does it mean to pay fairly to your staff? What does it mean to do outreach and to share what you have with communities that could really benefit from the resources that you have? I am one of those people that people used to say, well, you don't just want to write a check to these. I'm like, some churches, that's the most powerful thing you can do, is the resources you have to impact a community. Like, there's an organization doing work with, let's say, doing work with a community that you believe in and you support, but none of you necessarily have proximity or expertise. Why not support an organization that does and become in partnership with an organization that's working with incarcerated people, right? I mean, we're called to visit the incarcerated, right? So, like, or doing work with migrants or whatever things you believe in, like, you could fund those kind of things, as long as you know what's enough, and everybody can kind of come in agreement. But I think until you know, it's going to be a constant battle of not enough and too much. And so having the conversation about, well, what actually is enough? What the church I was at before, I was like, can we just say this endowment's never going to go above this, and we just give everything else away once you reach this amount of money? And you would have thought, that I was like, give it all away. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. But I think $3 million is enough, right? I mean, so that was kind of, we were having these conversations. Anyway, all right, we'll take one more. Go for it. Anybody? All right. Okay, so what we're going to do next is, I'm going the wrong way. No, there's my dog. Let's just stare at Vespa for just a moment. People often will say, I want to know what my dog's saying. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because she's probably swearing at us at this very moment. Like, get this thing off of me. All right, so here's what we're going to do next. We are going to do a process of creating a communal prayer that is going to rely on you in the room. And in a minute, we're going to move you into small groups, and there looks like there's going to be 7 tables. We're going to shift over to this side of the room. And we're going to go through an exercise that is going to talk about, you actually have numbered, this is awesome. Christian educator, yeah. I feel like I should be in the kitchen delivering meals. All right, so I'll explain this as we go, but we're going to go through this exercise of creating a prayer together. We're not going to do this part. We're going to jump all this. Da-da-da-da-da. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want you to think about how God is good. And this is assuming that the people that show up today understand God to be good. That there is goodness in our faith, and that we now have to figure out how we talk about that in some of the ways that we do things. So we're going to go through a process of thinking about how God is good in a variety of areas, and then we're going to do a little process after that that's like, well, what are the obstacles to those good things being shared in the world? And then we're going to figure out how to articulate that through prayer. So this will be active, and you're going to move around, and I'll walk you through how it's going to go. So I want to just assume, I'm making some assumptions about people in the room, that there is a level of faith here. Various levels of faith. You have been adjacent to faith, like that. I assume there is wisdom in this space, right? That I hope that's a good assumption, that there is wisdom around these tables, that you all bring life experience and thought to all that we're doing together, that you have empathy, that you can hear folks, whether you know them or not, and you have some empathy towards how folks are going, that there's curiosity. I mean, you're here, which I'll just assume there's curiosity, and that you have conviction, you have opinion, you have, here's what I think. And so we're just, this is what this assumes. So what's going to happen is we're going to move you into these groups in just a minute. You're going to be doing some brainstorming together. It'll be 2 minutes of brainstorming, and then these pages are going to rotate around. So everybody is going to have a chance to see everything, but it's going to rotate and it's going to go fast. And those who like to, at the beginning stages, like to wordsmith and all that, you're going to be super frustrated because this is not, I'll tell you, this is not a time to debate. This is brainstorming. If any of you have ever done that before, it is fast, and that's how it goes. So what I want to do now is you have 7 minutes to stand up, stretch, however, and then come back to sit only at one of the 7 tables. Okay? So go ahead and get up. If you need to refill your coffee, come over here, and then we'll start, and I'll tell you what we're doing. All right, and we invite everybody to participate. So I think we need at least 4. How many people are here today, Grace? 6 people at each table, right? Yeah. Yeah, it was like, so we need at least 6 people, around 5 or 6 people, 5 to 7 people at each table. Because we believe 42 divided by 7 is 6. I didn't even use my phone. Bum, 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 bum. Please do. Well,
No, I don't. Not that bad.
Well, I'm making way.
Thank you.
Are you going to come join it? You can come join us at one of the tables there? Yep. Let's get to our tables. I know.
Table 4 is dangerous.
Grace, we're supposed to be in at 12:30. Is that right? Okay. All right, come on over to a table. We need, there's nobody at 2. We need to have five to 7 people at a table. 6, you're 6? Wait, so Grace can't count, apparently, is what's happening. We divided 42 by 7, and that came out to 6 today. Is that right? Yeah, you're good. You stay here. You stay here. We need you here. And then we made it another one. It's like the cafeteria. No. We need 7 tables. And we need probably one more over. I know, look at this. It's just become middle school cafeteria time. I don't want to leave my friends. Yeah. It's fun. Yeah, look at you. Good job. Go to 5. 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 You're just wanted. Everybody wants you.
Yes, they do. We're friends. That's okay.
All right. I think we're 6. 6 or 5. Yeah, 6 or 5. All right. That'll work. Lovely, lovely. Look at how well we did that. I did this last week with somebody, and it was a train wreck. Because we tried to do it without tables. It was terrible. People spread out over the floors. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. I'm going to give you 7 topics, and you're going to talk about, I'll give you what your prompt for them, but there's 7 areas that we're going to write our prayer in. And these are the 7 areas. So I'm going to point to you, right? So 1, at the top of your page, you're going to write your thing. So people gathered is 1. Pain, grief, and lament is 2. So you'll write that on your sheet somewhere. 3 is confession and forgiveness. 4 is movement of the Spirit. 5 is resurrection of Jesus Christ. 6 is the sacraments. And 7 is actually God's sending, not calling, sending. Sending. Okay? You discovered that's a better word. So God's sending. Yeah, so everybody make sure you have somebody who writes somewhat legibly on that big piece of paper. And then what we're going to be doing... All right, so here's your question, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do. How does God's goodness make itself known in your particular area? Right? How does God's goodness make itself known through confession, lament, through God's sending, through the resurrection, whatever it is? How does God's goodness make itself known? And what we're going to do is you're going to have 2-minute rotations because we're running out of time. You're going to have 2-minute rotations. I will let you know when you have 30 seconds left, and then we're going to rotate. So 1 will go to 2, 2 goes to 3. You'll rotate the pages, not the people. Yes, please don't start getting up. Yeah. So you rotate the pages all the way around, and then when you get the new page, you're going to read it, you're going to star ones you like, and you're going to keep adding. You are not crossing off, okay? If you don't like it, that's fine, but you don't get to be like, that's wrong. Yeah, you don't get to say, this one's wrong. So that's what it's going to happen, and I will time us, and this is brainstorming. We will have a time to do some wordsmithing together, So right now, it's a fast-moving kind of thing, all right? So we'll do our first round. So how does God's goodness make itself known in your area? Go. Yep. What God's sending? God sends it into the world. Yeah, sending you into the world. Brainstorming. How does God's goodness make itself known? Yeah, usually, yeah. How does God's goodness make itself known in your area? You look like a press room. Ooh, look at you all. That's great. Woo, look at you all. Yeah. 30 seconds. Okay, rotate your pages. 6 to 7, 7 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. Yeah, the page, just the page goes. Just the page. So read them over as a group, individually or as a group. Star the ones that you really like, you want to reaffirm. Star, and then keep adding. Okay, go. Star them if you like them.
Can we star more than one?
Yes, you can star more than one. I love good Presbyterians, want to know the exact rules of everything.
This is what they had to say about the resurrection.
Yeah.
So if we really like them,
You could
and we can add to
star as many as you like. Yeah, star as many as you like. All right, 30 seconds. Okay, rotate. Rotate the pages. You guys should have a new page. Read them over, star ones you like. Add. Remember, no crossing off.
People gather, kindness, volunteering, generosity, prayer for each other, inspiration, sharing, lifting up, visitation, hospitality, love, empathy, listening, silence, outreach, learning, fun, empathy, diversity, variety of experience. Okay? Sure.
It's going to be hard when you got to get it down to.
Okay, Bruce, this is working really well.
Okay, awesome. 30 seconds. We don't have the red squiggly line when we're doing it on newsprint. You can, if you want, before you can squeeze them in. All right, rotate, 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 rotate. Read them over, star ones you like, and add.
Where they are.
30 seconds. All right, rotates. Last week I was with like almost half educators.
Yeah.
Woo. impressive. Mm.
I do. I struggle with that word. And so did you. Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. Take the cup from me, yeah.
Together and yeah, something right.
20 seconds. No, not yet. All right, rotate, rotate. Dun, 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 dun. We're getting close, we're getting close. So they changed the landscape. We're going to rewrite it.
There's always one.
There's always one.
Yeah, no.
Kind and loving, faithful people. But people. Do we add a second page? Should we just
I would, yeah, I would just keep.
He says we know we are. Oh, I see.
Yes, rescue, absolutely.
30 seconds.
Take control of situation. It's just my nature. Extra bar.
Good.
Thank you.
That's a good gauge.
All right, rotate, rotate. Dun, 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 dun. Look how much wisdom's in this room. Look at that. Correct. Yes. Yeah. Until you come back to your own. Thirty seconds.
Exactly, yeah, at this point, it's hard to even not dependent on reciprocity or traditional,
Breezy. I don't know. What is the winsome? Huh. Casual, as you go, maybe? Does winsome have negative or positive connotations? I don't think it has positive, yeah. It's like,
That's kind of what Nancy was talking about.
oh, look at that. We'll take that. All right, rotate. You should have your original paper back. You should have your, if this all worked out as the way it has been planned. Woo, okay. All right. Here's the next step. For those of you that want to do more wordsmithing and talking, here's your next step. So what you're going to do now please keep in mind, you are not making decisions for the church. This is not, we're not voting this. This is not your new statement of faith. So we're treating this as it's important, but this is not, we're not voting. So what I'm going to ask you next, every Presbyterian, every place I go to wants more specifics, but this is what you're going to get. So what I want you to do now is to narrow to 3 that are bubbling up for your table, for your group. What are 3 important concepts about how God is good in this, right? So you're going to narrow to your top 3 ways that God's goodness shows up in this area. I don't encourage you to use semicolons and colons and just keep adding things together, but sometimes that's what happens, which is fine. So, but just 3 things out of that group, and you'll have about 7 minutes to do this. So, and then you're going to create the second page that's going to look like that. 1, 2, 3. Okay? Oh. Right. So that page from your original one, what are 3? So your 3 things will each be in each column. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Well, what are your top 3 things? Right, you can discuss like what are the 3 ways that God's goodness shows up in the area of the people gathered, and you can do it however you would say, but. Right? Oh, yes. Question. Narrow your top 3 ways. So out of these things, what are the correct on the second page in 3 columns? Yes. Yep. Yep. So the 3 out of your area, what are the 3 ones that? No, you're going to keep it. Yeah. You're keeping your paper. We're not passing. You're keeping your paper. You all get to decide what your 3 are. You come up with 3. You are doing it right. I mean, just come up with 3 of the kind of the main ones that experience God's goodness. Some people, like, there's a lot that overlap. So if you wanted to, do a couple that seem to make sense together, you can do that.
So you can have other things besides
if they kind of they kind of are in similar vein, yeah, certainly. I mean, the rules are loose. No.
I can't deal with that. No, well, we have a lot of things. We have sheriff,
No, we're not passing these. Yeah, you will keep this, you will keep your sheet. Look at you all. Great. The best part, so what's really fun is you assign 2 people just to observe and then report back what they saw and how groups work together. It's fascinating. Yeah. Well, and then it's also like if there's a bunch of educators in the room or if there's scientists in the room, it just depends on, or other pastors. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, depending on who's in the space. All right, you guys have your 3? Awesome, great. How are you all doing? All right, how are you doing?
he said it kind of goes together. Now,
Good, okay.
We discovered a problem in the process.
Okay.
If you get one of the last papers, you can't get more than 1 star.
Well, so you also don't have to go by the star. Right, yeah. But yes, you are right.
We had time on our
Okay. We should have electronic voting. Do it one more time around. Mail it. Oh, you got your 3? Awesome, great. Do you all have your 3? You have your 3?
We've got them, yeah, we didn't put
Okay.
it in columns.
That's all right. There's always one table. There's always one table. That's all. How are you all doing? Almost? All right, we're almost there. We're almost there. Oh, you're not? Oh, we got 2 that are not quite there yet. If you don't come to 3, it's fine too. Can we have 4? We have 2, Mike. No. There's always, depending on what kind of room you're in. Or some people need to have really specific rules. It's interesting. I was saying at this table that sometimes we pick a couple of people to just observe and then report back what they saw and how tables interacted and worked together and just kind of see, because it depends on if you have a bunch of educators in the room or if you have scientists, think very differently, right? Just depending on how, Yeah. All right, we're waiting on a couple of groups. You have 2? Okay. You down to at least 2? Yeah. Okay.
Go away. All right, so we failed the opportunity.
You did not fail. Nobody is failing today. Nobody is failing. Good Lord. All right, so here's what we're going to do now. Thank you. You've come up. So this is, the reason this is kind of difficult too is because you're exercising a muscle that we don't actually use very often, is to actually begin to think about how does God's goodness show up in, this is not by mistake. Every Sunday you experience this flow of our worship together, right? God's gathering of God's people, the movement of the Spirit, confession, lament, all that, sacraments, resurrection, and then sending. So this is what you experience every Sunday. And so now we're just challenging ourselves to say, well, what's good about that? Like what in that experience, what is good? So what I'm going to ask you to do now is we're going to go one by one and share out to the group. What were your top 3 or 2? 2 is not a failure. 4 is not an A+. There's no AP honors here. So we're going to ask what were your top 2 or 3 and any others that almost made the cut, and then anything interesting. So we need microphones. Let's go to table 1 first on the mics. Microphones. Here comes one. All right, so let's everybody look at table 1. Tell us what you had, and then what are your 3? Okay, table 1.
Yes. Okay. So we were the people gathered. And so our question was, how does God show his goodness in the people gathered? Our number 1 was belonging. Now, I'm going to kind of go out of order because we had another one that almost made the cut, and that was community. And then we were like, well, there are some people who are a part of a community but don't feel like they belong. But you can also spin it the other way, saying that if you're belonging, you're technically belonging to a community. That is the community that is right for you, because not every community is right for every person. So that's kind of our number 1. Our number 2 was sharing, because if people are able to share their beliefs, their possessions, their whatever, then that is just welcoming other people into their community and therefore sharing God's goodness. And then we have acceptance for number 3, and that was just if people are willing to accept others' beliefs, like just who they are in general, then therefore God's goodness.
Good, great, thank you. We can clap. Good job, you all. Great. Any questions for? Keep the mic a little bit. Any questions for 1, as we go through? Okay, let's go to 2. Say what your group is, and then what are your ones?
So we were number 2, which was the pain, grief, and lament category. And we also have the online folks that provided feedback and input. So thank you to the online folks. So we had 2. We only ended up on 2, pulling from multiple components on the list. But the first one was God's goodness is shown through the importance of community pulling together to share grief. And then our second one was that we lament to God, who knows our suffering and shows us a path to compassion, understanding, and healing.
Good. Great, thank you. Well, lovely. Yes, good job, yo. Yay. Yay, good job. Good job. Questions for them? All right. Lovely, 2. There you go. All right, 3. What's your area, and what did you come up with?
Confession and forgiveness. To be unembarrassed to admit wrongdoing, accepting the grace given freely by God for the suffering cause, that we may let it go as a community.
Woo! That's one.
There isn't even a comma in that one. Paul would be very proud. And then the other one is through honest confession, we receive forgiveness and find peace and reconciliation.
Great, thank you, thank you. Good job, you all. Yes, confession. Great. All right, number 4, what do you got?
Okay, ours is movement of the Spirit. The first one is when we feel God's love through action of others. Second is accepting to be open to surprises and mysteries. And 3 is allows us to change even when we don't want to.
Wow, nice, lovely. Yay, good job, good job. All right, number 5. You have the easy one, right?
We have resurrection. We have chosen, it's not going to sound so sad after so many words, but new life, new in parentheses, so new or just life in itself. That death doesn't have the last word. We liked that. There were a lot of different ways to say that, but we thought that was the most powerful. And thank you. Oh, well, now we don't like it. We've changed our mind. Oh, it was so good. It was incredible. And then the last one is sending of love into the world.
Great.
A controversial one, even.
Good. Great.
That's all.
Awesome. Great. Thank you all. Good job. Good job. Resurrection. All right. 6.
On number 6, we had the sacraments and the way we see God's goodness.
is in one area, renewal and rescue. A second area was community sharing, belonging, and joining, which has been stated more than once. And the third area was love and peace.
Great, awesome, great, thank you. Good job, sacraments. All right, sending us, God is sending, what does that look like, your top three?
All right, our top three is 1, inspire us to mission and service, 2, caring for creation, stewardship, and 3, being God's hands and feet. Notice how short ours were because Paul is the only one credited with actually killing somebody because he preached too long.
Okay, pastors. All right, so here's your next step. We are going to go till like 12:45, so apologies for that, but I want to make sure we get to this. You're going to briefly talk about the obstacles. Why, like if these are the things that we believe are good about this area of God, like why, what are the reasons why that isn't known? Like what are the social, cultural, political, theological, institutional, personal barriers to seeing these things come to be known more fully? Like why aren't these things the norm of what we do? So you're going to do that for about 5 minutes, talk about that, and then I'll give you another, we're going to do our last stage, which is write a little prayer. So if you believe the sacraments reveal and rescue, why do not more people know that? What's holding us back from having that be more widely known and experienced? That could be. But like why, what are the barriers to that particular thing being known in the world, being known?
Do we work on this or a third paper?
You work on that. That's the 3 columns. Yeah, work on that. Your third paper is for the last stage, right? So you're going to write on the same page in those 3 columns if possible. Yep. What's holding us back from knowing the goodness of these things? Just talk about it. We're not going to report back.
By people out there in the world that I could tell them.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want my wisdom.
Now you do know how you don't talk.
You don't. Yeah,
You know,
when you said don't look at anyone for your mother, I was like, don't look at Sue, don't look at Sue, don't look at
Hmm.
Sometimes it's physically hard to care for creation.
That'll go here first.
And I will say, there are times when I haven't felt comfortable sharing with like, if something's really easy, I go, okay, I'll start with it. If you're not church, yes, that excludes you.
Well, or even if you're churched.
You don't always know what it means.
Setting that doesn't use that kind of.
I'm sorry, I'm busy in the yard.
Or the sacristan.
In the S.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully you've been having some conversations about what's holding us back.
We're stuck
right, all. I'm going to take you to the last step. It's the last step. You've having a conversation about what's holding us back. Here's what you're going to do now for the next 6 minutes. Is you are going to craft a prayer that we're using tomorrow. So you are basically, we're not asking you, this is not a prayer you're going out into the world. We're going to all go to the cafe down the street and read it out loud to the world. Tomorrow, what's the prayer you want us to pray together about your particular area in order to articulate the faith claims you've just made? Right? So as we pray together tomorrow, for that gathering one, what are the faith claims you're making and what's that prayer? And we're looking like 1 or 2 sentences, not like you're not writing 10 sentences, please. 1 or 2 sentences that capture the faith claims that you've made now, knowing the obstacles, but so 1 or 2 sentences. What would that look like? Yeah, 7 minutes. 7 minutes. You have time. Did I say 2 minutes? Oh, 7 minutes. Sorry, 7 minutes, not 2 minutes. 7 minutes. You can liberate them.
That, to me, this has been a good exercise. And for our church people that are watching it, like,
So that we
can relieve ourselves of vengeance.
Avoid
the obstacle of self-forgiveness. The shame.
The shame.
The shame of self-forgiveness. The shame, which prevents us from experiencing
perfect love has no fear. That was saying it loud.
Okay. Because we want these 3, right? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so, all right. Are you putting a semicolon? You're just going on. Oh, I'm. Okay, go, girl.
Look at you all. Good job.
Nobody tell them we're the A team.
We win. There are no podiums at the end of this.
Okay, good. So we had one person, just so for your purposes. So we had 2 people that were engaging and modeling, and I think we maintained 15 people
Watching.
And I think this
Huh.
I think this was an okay way to do it. It was confusing. We had
But we
somebody
figured it
model,
out. Yeah.
and we figured it out, and I think we did it.
Awesome. That's great. All right, start finishing up.
to put it into action. You can be aware that you have to do something. Okay?
All right, start to finish up. Is the only thing we really do have to finish is the prayer.
Not my issue.
Not your issue tomorrow. This is always the danger when people are like, can we use it the next Sunday? I'm like, okay, we'll see how, like, the beauty is it comes from the people. So. Prayer. All right, I'm looking. It looks like people are coming. You're getting there? All right. You're good? You're good? Are you all almost there? You getting there? Yep. All right. Awesome. Getting there. You all are good? You're good. Good. You're done. They're getting done. When you get to the point, you all will start, and then you'll just hand the mic to number 2. Okay. I'm going to do one more thing before that, but we'll be good. All right, all. We getting there? I'm looking. It looks like everybody's done. Okay. So, thank you. We're going to do a couple more things, then we'll be done in just a couple minutes. But I will be with you tomorrow after worship. You can ask more questions. I think I'll be with the youth right before that, but afterwards we can do more Q&A. But let me ask you this question. So sometimes I do this exercise and I have a couple of people just observe people working together to see what they see about a church or an organization and how things just operate, and you get some feedback. But let me ask you, we spent our time together this morning, yesterday, but in this time, what were the values that were expressed and experienced in this room? If somebody was just observing you, what did they see?
Oh, definitely community.
Community, okay, what else? Joy. Dialogue. What else? Say that again? Collaboration. Inclusiveness. What else did they see? Respect. Belonging. Laughter. Yes, I was waiting for that one to come up. Yeah. Puzzlement at first, which is okay, yes. Yes.
You know, after seeing this process, become a process for just a small portion of our liturgy in the morning or our worship experience, I have a lot of respect for what goes into the thought.
Yeah. So after just watching this little part being created, more respect for crafting an entire service and what that means. Yeah, you're going to say something? Evolution of thought. Great. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important so when I work with sessions, I ask this question at the end of every session meeting so that we become to get into the habit of how we interact with each other actually is important. And so how we experience one another, how do we want to be viewed, not in a fake way, but what are the ways in which we want to model for the world? And so I think that's a good question. And before we end, we've been doing a lot of this stuff up here. Are there prayers just sitting in this space that we want to lift up? Just lift up to the community right now? Are there any prayers for you or people as we end our time today that you want to make sure we know about? Grace.
For my friend Trevor, he's 40 and just got diagnosed with stage 4 brain tumor.
Oh, so Trevor, Grace's friend who stage 4. Suffering of the world. Okay. Anything else that we want to lift up? Things going?
My mother's surgery on her ankle went well. She went home yesterday afternoon. She's home and will be in healing phases. Also, prayers of continued healing and also successful hip surgery for Kathy Rito, who I texted with this morning. She's doing very well.
All right, so ankle surgery for your mom and then hip surgery for who? Catherine. Okay. Great. Awesome. Yes?
I'd like to ask prayer for our interfaith community. This island is a very committed interfaith community.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need to lift up.
All right, so the interfaith community, especially around here, yeah? Other person, yep.
I'd like to ask give prayers of thanksgiving that we were able to have people not present in our sanctuary but online and
Great, awesome. Able to do it. Great, awesome. Great. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Jonathan going to Lebanon. Yes, for sure.
Thanksgiving for other friends from other churches offline
Yes.
that have also attended
Yes.
and participated with us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. All right, so we're going to close with prayer. We're going to start one. What I'll ask you to do is whoever's going to read it at your table, just move the mic on to the next table until we get all the way back around. All right, so let us pray.
Dear God, where people are gathered, give us the wisdom, compassion, and courage to help others belong, share with open hearts, and feel our acceptance through Christ.
We lament to God, who knows our suffering and shows us a path to compassion, understanding, and hearing. We thank you, God, for giving us community that pulls together to share our grief.
I'll speak.
In you, O God, perfect love has no fear, which invites us to a space where we can leave behind shame and enter into your grace. Help us to be honest as we admit our tendency to move toward vengeance and payback.
Give us the courage to show your love. Strengthen our trust in you.
Dear God, open us up to your future for the world.
Dear Lord, help us to be open to our need for renewal and resolve. Help us to quiet contemplation of interest so that we can experience your love and peace in our community.
And help us, God, to be more vulnerable and be aware of the needs of others above our own. Inspire us to answer the call to be God's hands and feet.
And all God's people say, Amen. All right, well done. You all go in peace. Give your sheets, give your sheet to Grace over there. Your prayer sheet. Make sure that gets to Grace, because we'll use that tomorrow.